Welcome. Before we begin tonight's story, I have one question. Where are you listening from tonight? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy falling asleep to these calm but chilling tales, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, close your eyes and let the forest take you. When you stand alone in the redwood forest at dawn, you think you know what silence is like. The trees here, in addition to their great height, swallow sound, light, and sometimes people too. I'm Ryler Hanford, and I've been working as a forest ranger for the National Park Service for about 7 years. What I'm about to tell you is more than just folklore. It's entirely what we've seen, documented, and been told to handle discreetly. The morning it happened started like any other. I'd clocked in at the ranger station at 6:15, grabbed my thermos of coffee, and headed out for the dawn patrol of Sector 7, a stretch of backcountry road that winds through some of the oldest growth in the park. The road's been officially closed to public vehicles for 3 years now due to erosion and falling debris, but we still check it daily. Hikers ignore the barriers. Thrill seekers drive around the gates, and every so often someone just doesn't come back. The fog was dense that morning, the kind that clings to your jacket and makes your flashlight beam look solid. Redwoods create their own weather system. The canopy's so thick that even at midday, the forest floor stays in permanent twilight. At dawn, with the fog rolling in from the Pacific, visibility drops to maybe 15 feet. I've learned to navigate by the feel of the gravel under my boots and the smell of the coast mixing with decomposing wood. I was about 2 miles in when I saw it, a silver Honda Civic, parked at an awkward angle just off the shoulder, driver's door hanging open. The hazards weren't on, no flat tire, no visible damage, just sitting there like someone had pulled over to check their phone and forgot to come back. But you don't forget your car in a closed section of national forest, not unless something's very wrong. I radioed it in immediately. "Dispatch, this is Hanford. I've got an abandoned vehicle on Old Mill Road, approximately 2 miles past the North Gate. Silver Honda Civic, California plates." I read off the license number while walking a slow circle around the car, scanning for any signs of struggle or distress. Nothing. The ground was soft from recent rain, but there were no clear footprints leading away from the vehicle, just smudged depressions that could have been anything. "Copy that, Riley," came the response. "Running the plates now. Sit tight." I didn't sit tight. I moved closer to the car, shining my light through the open door. A purse sat in the passenger seat, contents undisturbed. A road atlas lay open on the dashboard, one of those old paper ones people stopped using a decade ago. In the cup holder, a gas station coffee, still lukewarm, and on the seat, a phone. Dead battery, but no signs of panic. No frantic final texts, just a phone someone set down and walked away from. The radio crackled. "Hanford, vehicles registered to Julia Corbin, 28 Berkeley address. Reported missing by her roommate 3 days ago. Last known location was a camping trip in your area." 3 days. My stomach tightened. 3 days in these woods, and we're not looking for a rescue anymore. We're looking for remains, or worse, we're looking forever. I stepped back from the car and scanned the tree line. The redwoods here stand like cathedral columns, some of them over 300 feet tall and older than the country itself. Their bark is fire-scarred and deeply grooved, the kind of texture that plays tricks on your eyes in low light. You start seeing faces, shapes, movement where there's none. I forced myself to focus. If Julia Corbin had wandered into those trees, she could be 50 feet away or 5 miles deep. The forest doesn't care about your plans. "Dispatch, I'm going to do a preliminary sweep of the immediate area," I said. "Request backup and search and rescue on standby." I didn't wait for approval. Every minute counts in situations like this, and I wasn't about to stand around while someone filled out paperwork. I grabbed my pack, checked my GPS tracker, and started walking the perimeter of the vehicle in expanding circles, calling out her name. "Julia! Julia Corbin! If you can hear me, make noise!" Nothing, just the forest breathing. The creak of branches, the rustle of something small moving through the undergrowth, the distant sound of water dripping from leaves. I widened my circle, marking trees as I went with reflective tape so I could find my way back. The ground was a carpet of sorrel and ferns, punctuated by massive root systems that jutted up like the knuckles of sleeping giants. It's easy to trip here, easy to lose your footing and crack your skull on a rock hidden under the vegetation. I've seen it happen. 15 minutes into my search, I found the first real clue. A scrap of fabric, light blue, synthetic, the kind of material you'd find on a cheap rain jacket, caught on a low branch about 30 yards from the car. It was fresh, no weathering or discoloration. I bagged it and kept moving. The fabric suggested she'd gone deeper into the woods, away from the road. That didn't make sense. Lost hikers almost always try to stay near landmarks, near roads, near anything that feels like civilization. But Julia had walked directly into the thickest part of the forest, where the canopy blocked out the sky entirely. I followed the trajectory, moving carefully, calling her name every few minutes. The trees here are so densely packed that sound doesn't travel right. It gets absorbed, muffled, swallowed. You can be 10 feet from someone and never hear them scream. That's the part they don't tell you in training. They teach you search patterns and survival techniques, but they don't prepare you for the way this place makes you feel small, irrelevant, temporary. You're just another organic thing that'll break down and feed the soil eventually. Another 20 yards in, I found her backpack. It was sitting upright at the base of a tree. Zippers closed, straps neatly arranged. Not dropped, not torn off in a panic, placed. I approached it slowly, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. This wasn't right. People don't calmly set down their gear and keep walking into the wilderness. I opened the pack carefully, documenting everything with my body camera. Water bottles, full. Energy bars, unopened. First aid kit, untouched. A wallet with her ID, credit cards, $40 in cash, and a journal. I flipped it open to the last entry, dated 2 days ago. The handwriting was neat, controlled, deliberate. The trees are older than memory. I can feel them watching. Not hostile, just aware. There's something deeper in, something I need to see. I'm going to find it. That was it. No explanation, no coordinates, no hint of what she was looking for. Just a calm statement of intent from someone about to walk into oblivion. I radioed it in, my voice steadier than I felt. "Dispatch, I've located the missing person's backpack and personal effects. She went deeper into the forest off trail. I'm going to need that search and rescue team now." The response came back crackling with static. "Copy, Hanford. Teams en route. ETA 40 minutes. Do not proceed alone. Repeat, do not proceed alone." I looked at the journal again, then at the wall of trees ahead of me. 40 minutes. In 40 minutes, Julia Corbin could be miles away or dead from exposure. Or worse. I've broken protocol before, every ranger has. Sometimes the rulebook gets people killed. I marked my position with a strobe beacon, made sure my GPS was transmitting, and kept moving. The forest seemed to close in tighter the farther I went, the trees leaning toward each other like conspirators. The ground sloped downward, and I could hear running water somewhere below, one of the countless seasonal creeks that carve through these hills. Julia might have followed the water, thinking it would lead her out. It wouldn't. These creeks don't go anywhere useful. They just wind deeper into the backcountry until they vanish into the moss. I found her shoe about 50 yards further. Just one, a hiking boot, laces still tied, sitting in the middle of the trail like she'd stepped out of it and kept walking barefoot. My pulse quickened. That's a bad sign. When people start shedding clothing or gear in the wilderness, it usually means hypothermia has set in and their brain's shutting down, convincing them they're too hot when they're actually freezing. But it was May, and the temperature was a mild 55 degrees, not cold enough for that kind of confusion. I picked up the boot and examined it. No blood, no signs of injury, just a boot that someone had calmly removed and left behind. I was starting to understand why the other rangers didn't like working Sector 7. There's a dozen old stories about this part of the forest. Hikers who walked in and never came out. Sounds that don't match any known animal, lights seen moving between the trees at night. I'd always dismissed them as campfire tales, the kind of thing bored rangers tell rookies to mess with their heads. But standing there, holding Julia Corbin's boot, I wasn't so sure anymore. The radio on my belt squawked. "Hanford, what's your position?" I checked my GPS and relayed the coordinates. I'm about a quarter-mile northeast of the vehicle, following a trail of evidence. She's shedding gear. I think she might be in trouble. The voice on the other end paused, then said, "Riley, you need to come back. Search and rescue is here. They'll take over from your position." I knew I should turn around. I knew I was violating every safety protocol in the book, but something about the way that boot was sitting there, perfectly upright, perfectly placed, made me keep moving. The trees were massive here, some of them 30 feet in diameter at the base, their trunks so wide you could drive a car through the hollows burned into them by ancient fires. The bark was spongy under my hand, damp with fog and the perpetual mist that hangs in the canopy. I could hear my own breathing, loud and uneven in the silence. And then, just ahead, I saw something that made me stop cold. A clearing. Redwoods don't do clearings. They dominate every inch of available space, their root systems intertwining so thoroughly that nothing else can grow. But there it was, a perfect circle of open ground, maybe 20 feet across, surrounded by a ring of the oldest trees I'd ever seen. And in the center of the clearing, sitting cross-legged with her back to me, was Julia Corbin. She was barefoot, her other shoe nowhere in sight, wearing just a t-shirt and jeans despite the morning chill. Her hair was loose, hanging down her back in dark tangles. She wasn't moving, wasn't making a sound, just sitting there staring at the trees on the far side of the clearing. I called out to her, my voice echoing strangely in the open space. "Julia? Julia Corbin." She didn't turn around. I approached slowly, my hand instinctively moving to the radio on my belt. Training says to make noise, to announce yourself, to avoid startling someone who might be in shock. But something about the scene felt wrong, staged, like I was walking into the middle of something I wasn't supposed to see. "Julia, I'm Riley. I'm with the Park Service. Your roommate's been worried about you. Are you hurt?" Still no response. I circled around to get a look at her face, and that's when I saw her eyes. They were open, wide open, unblinking, staring straight ahead with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Her lips were moving slightly, forming words I couldn't hear. I knelt down in front of her, waving my hand in her line of sight. "Julia, can you hear me?" Her eyes didn't track my movement. It was like looking at someone who was awake but not present, their body occupied but their mind somewhere else entirely. I checked her pulse, steady, strong, normal. No signs of injury, no bleeding, no obvious trauma. Just a woman sitting in a forest clearing, catatonic and unreachable. I radioed for immediate medical evacuation, giving them my exact coordinates. While I waited, I tried again to get through to her, speaking calmly, asking simple questions, checking her pupils for signs of drug use or head trauma. Nothing. She just kept staring, lips moving in that silent rhythm, like she was having a conversation with someone I couldn't see. I've seen shock before, seen people break down after getting lost in the wilderness. This was different. This was something else. The medical team arrived 15 minutes later, crashing through the underbrush with a stretcher and emergency gear. They took over, checking her vitals, wrapping her in thermal blankets, trying to get a verbal response. One of the EMTs, a woman named Garcia, who I'd worked with before, looked at me with genuine confusion. "She's medically fine," Garcia said quietly. "Heart rate, blood pressure, temperature, all normal, but it's like nobody's home." They loaded Julia onto the stretcher and started the long trek back to the road, where an ambulance was waiting. I stayed behind for a moment, standing in that clearing, trying to understand what I'd just witnessed. The trees around me seemed taller suddenly, the shadows deeper. I looked at the spot where Julia had been sitting, and that's when I noticed it. The ground beneath her was completely dry. The rest of the clearing, the rest of the forest floor for miles in every direction, was damp from morning dew and fog, but the small circle where she'd been sitting was bone dry, the earth almost warm to the touch. I knelt down and pressed my palm against it, feeling the heat radiating up from somewhere below. Before I could investigate further, my radio crackled with Garcia's voice. "Hanford, we need you back at the road, now." The urgency in her tone pulled me out of my trance. I marked the spot with GPS coordinates, took a few photos, and followed the trail of broken ferns and disturbed earth back toward the vehicle. When I emerged from the tree line, the scene had transformed into controlled chaos. Sheriff's deputies, search and rescue personnel, my supervisor Bill Kessner, and 2 EMTs working on Julia in the back of the ambulance. Everyone was talking at once. Bill pulled me aside, his face grim. "What the hell happened out there, Riley?" I gave him the rundown, the abandoned car, the trail of discarded gear, finding Julia in the clearing. He listened without interrupting, but I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. When I finished, he just nodded slowly and said, "Write it up exactly as you told me. Don't editorialize, don't speculate. Just facts. That's code for, this is going to get complicated, cover your ass." I'd heard it before, usually when something happened that didn't fit into neat little boxes. They transported Julia to the regional hospital in Eureka, still unresponsive, still staring at nothing. I gave my statement to the sheriff's deputy, a guy named Morrison who I'd worked with on previous incidents. He asked all the standard questions: condition of the vehicle, timeline of events, my observations of Julia's state. When I mentioned the dry circle of earth, he stopped writing and looked at me. "Dry?" he repeated. I nodded. Completely dry, like it had been heated from below. Morrison wrote that down, but didn't comment. That was the first sign that things were about to get weird. The next 3 days were a blur of paperwork, debriefings, and follow-up searches. They sent a full team back to the clearing, documented everything, took soil samples, photographed the scene from every angle. The area where Julia had been sitting was still dry, still warm. The forensics team couldn't explain it. One of them, a guy from Sacramento who specialized in environmental analysis, told me off the record that the temperature differential suggested geothermal activity. But there are no hot springs in that part of the forest. No volcanic features, no geological reason for the ground to be radiating heat. Julia Corbin woke up 4 days after we found her. I wasn't there when it happened, but Garcia called me that evening to let me know. "She's awake and talking," Garcia said. "But Riley, She doesn't remember anything after leaving her car. She said she got out to check her map, thought she heard something in the trees, and the next thing she knows, she's in a hospital bed. Total blackout. 3 days missing, and she had no memory of how she'd gotten into the forest, why she'd shed her gear, or what she'd been doing in that clearing. The official report listed it as a case of acute dissociative fugue brought on by stress and possible dehydration, despite the fact that she showed no signs of dehydration and her water bottles were full. Case closed. File it away. Move on to the next crisis. But I couldn't let it go. I went back to that clearing on my own time, hiking in after my shifts, trying to understand what had happened. The dry spot was gone. The earth was damp and cool like everywhere else. No trace of the anomaly that had been there before. But the trees still felt wrong, their shadows too deep, their silence too complete. I started asking questions, carefully, quietly, to the other rangers who'd been working the area for longer than I had. Most of them shut down immediately, changing the subject or suddenly remembering they had somewhere else to be. But one of the older rangers, a woman named Patricia Voss, who was 6 months from retirement, pulled me aside one evening at the station. "You found someone in the clearing," she said. Not a question, a statement. I nodded. Patricia sighed and looked out the window at the darkening forest. "That's the third one in 15 years. She told me about the others. A hiker in 2008, found sitting in the same clearing, same catatonic state, same missing time. He'd woken up in the hospital claiming he'd been called into the forest but couldn't explain by what. Then, a backpacker in 2014, discovered in the exact same spot, same symptoms, same memory gap. Both times the ground beneath them had been dry and warm. Both times the reports were filed and buried. "We're not supposed to talk about it," Patricia said. "Park Service doesn't want people getting spooked, thinking there's something supernatural going on." "Is there?" I asked. Patricia looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't expected. Fear. Real, genuine fear from a woman who'd spent 30 years walking these woods alone. "I don't know what it is," she finally said, "but I know it's not natural, and I know it's not safe. My advice: stay away from Sector 7 after dark. Don't go looking for answers you're not ready to handle." Then she left, leaving me standing in the empty ranger station, watching night fall over the redwoods. I couldn't sleep that night. Patricia's warning kept replaying in my head, mixing with the image of Julia Corbin sitting in that clearing, lips moving soundlessly, eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. I lived in ranger housing on the edge of the park, a small cabin that smelled like pine and had terrible cell reception. Usually I loved the isolation. Tonight, it felt suffocating. The forest pressed against the windows, branches scraping the roof every time the wind picked up, and I kept thinking about those other two people, the hiker in 2008, the backpacker in 2014, both found in the same clearing, both missing time, both with no explanation. I pulled out my laptop and started digging. Park Service records are supposed to be comprehensive, but I quickly discovered that certain incidents had been scrubbed clean. The 2008 case had a single-page report filed by a ranger who'd retired shortly after. No follow-up, no investigation, just a brief note that the subject had been located and transported to medical care. Status resolved. The 2014 case was even thinner, just an incident number and a notation that it had been handled at supervisor level. No details, no names, nothing that would help me understand what was happening in that clearing. So I went older. I pulled up digitized archives from the 70s and 80s, back when everything was still on paper and nobody was worrying about digital security. That's where I found it. A case from 1976, a young woman named Claire Duval who'd gone missing while camping with friends. She'd wandered away from their site in the middle of the night, and they'd found her 3 days later sitting in a clearing. The report didn't specify which one, but I had a sinking feeling I knew. The ranger who'd written the report, a man named Douglas Brennan, had included details that never would have made it into a modern file. Subject was found in a semi-conscious state, unresponsive to verbal commands, Brennan had written. Ground beneath subject was noted to be unusually dry and warm to the touch, despite heavy rainfall the previous evening. Subject's shoes and jacket had been removed and placed in a neat arrangement approximately 15 yards from her position. When questioned after regaining consciousness, subject claimed she had been invited to sit and wait, but could not identify who or what had extended the invitation. Subject displayed no signs of substance abuse, head trauma, or psychological break. Recommend follow-up psychological evaluation. There it was. The same pattern, going back almost 50 years. The clearing, the missing time, the dry, warm ground, and that word invited. Julia hadn't used that word, but the hiker from 2008 had said he'd been called. Different words, same meaning. Something in that clearing was drawing people in, and whatever it was had been doing it for decades. I closed my laptop and looked out the window at the dark forest. Somewhere out there, maybe 2 miles from where I was sitting, that clearing existed. Waiting. The next morning, I reported for my shift like normal. Bill Kessner was in the office, reviewing patrol schedules, and he looked up when I walked in. "Hanford, good, you're here. I'm reassigning you to the coastal trails for the next few weeks. We need more coverage down there with the tourist season picking up." I stared at him, knowing exactly what he was doing. "You're pulling me off Sector 7. Bill didn't blink. "I'm putting you where you're needed. Is that a problem?" I wanted to argue, to tell him I wasn't done investigating, that something was happening in those woods that needed answers. But Bill had been doing this job for 23 years, and he had that look on his face, the one that said this conversation was over before it started. "No problem," I said. Bill nodded and went back to his paperwork. "Good. Coastal Patrol starts at 0700 tomorrow. Dismissed." I left the office, my jaw tight, knowing I'd just been benched. Patricia must have told him I was asking questions. Or maybe Bill had his own reasons for keeping people away from that clearing. I spent the rest of the day hiking the coastal trails, checking permits, helping lost tourists, doing all the routine ranger work that usually cleared my head. But I couldn't stop thinking about Claire Duval and her neat arrangement of shoes and jacket. Julia Corbin had done the same thing, shed her gear piece by piece, each item carefully placed rather than discarded in panic. That suggested intention, control. People experiencing a psychological break don't fold their clothes and set them down gently. They tear things off and scatter them. This was something else. That evening, I drove into Eureka to visit Julia in the hospital. I wasn't sure she'd want to see me. I was a reminder of whatever had happened to her, even if she couldn't remember it. But when I arrived, the nurse told me Julia had actually been asking about the ranger who'd found her. She was in a private room on the 3rd floor, sitting up in bed, looking thin and pale but alert. She smiled weakly when I walked in. "You're Riley," she said. Not a question. I nodded and pulled up a chair. "How are you feeling?" I asked. Julia shrugged, a gesture that seemed to take effort. "Tired, confused. They keep running tests, but everything comes back normal. Physically, I'm fine, but I don't understand what happened to me." She looked down at her hands, folding and unfolding them in her lap. "My roommate said I left Berkeley 4 days ago to go camping. I remember loading my car, driving north, getting excited about photographing the redwoods. And then nothing, just a blank space where 3 days should be. I pulled out my notebook. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions? Nothing official, just trying to understand the timeline. Julia nodded, so I continued. You were found sitting in a clearing about a quarter mile from your car. Do you remember walking there? She shook her head. I don't even remember getting out of my car. The last clear memory I have is pulling into the park, seeing the entrance sign. After that, it's like someone cut a piece out of my life. Your journal, I said carefully. You wrote an entry about the trees watching you, about going deeper to find something. Do you remember writing that? Julia's face went pale. What journal? I took out my phone and showed her a photo I'd taken of the page. She stared at it, her hands starting to shake. That's my handwriting, but I don't remember writing those words. I would never. I'm a photographer, not a mystic. I don't believe in trees watching people or whatever that means. We sat in silence for a moment, and I could see her trying to make sense of something that had no sense to make. Finally, she said, The doctors think I had some kind of dissociative episode, stress from work, relationship issues, something that made my brain shut down and put me on autopilot. But I wasn't stressed. I was happy. I'd been planning this trip for months, and I was finally doing it. There's no reason for me to just break like that. She looked at me with desperate eyes. You found me. What did you see? I told her everything. The clearing, the position she was sitting in, the way her eyes were open but unseeing, the dry, warm ground beneath her. I told her about the other cases, going back decades, all following the same pattern. Julia listened without interrupting, her face growing more troubled with each detail. When I finished, she said quietly, So I'm not crazy. Or if I am, I'm part of a long tradition of crazy. She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. You're not crazy, I said firmly. Something happened to you out there, something real. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm going to find out. Julia reached over and grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Please don't go back there. Whatever it is, it's not worth your life. I wanted to promise her I wouldn't, but I'm a terrible liar. Instead, I just squeezed her hand back and changed the subject, asking about her photography, her life in Berkeley, anything to pull her away from that clearing for a few minutes. I left the hospital as the sun was setting, painting the redwoods in shades of orange and red. The drive back to ranger housing took 40 minutes, winding through increasingly dense forest, passing the turnoff for Old Mill Road, where Julia's car had been found. On impulse, I pulled over at the gate. The area was still marked with police tape and temporary barriers, but there was no one guarding it. The investigation was over. Case closed. Nothing to see here. I sat in my truck, engine idling, staring down that dark tunnel of trees. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to drive away. I was off Sector 7. Bill had made that clear. Going back there, especially alone and after dark, was a violation of about 6 different safety protocols. But I thought about Claire Duval in 1976, about the hiker in 2008, about Julia Corbin sitting in that clearing with something using her like a puppet. And I thought about Patricia's fear when she told me to stay away. That kind of fear doesn't come from nothing. It comes from knowing something you wish you didn't. I turned off the engine and grabbed my gear. Flashlight, radio, GPS tracker, first aid kit, and my service pistol, though I wasn't sure what good a gun would do against whatever was out there. I ducked under the police tape and started walking up Old Mill Road, my flashlight cutting a weak beam through the darkness. The forest at night is a different world. The silence is deeper, more oppressive, broken only by the sounds you make. Your boots on gravel, your breath in the cold air, your heart pounding in your chest. I was about halfway to the clearing when I heard it. Footsteps behind me. Not the soft padding of an animal, but the distinct crunch of boots on the trail. I spun around, my light sweeping the road. Nothing. Just trees and darkness, and the fading echo of my own movement. I waited, listening, my hand resting on the grip of my pistol. The footsteps came again, closer this time, matching my rhythm exactly. Like someone was walking in my shadow, using my own noise to mask their approach. "This is Park Service," I called out, my voice sounding thin and uncertain. "Identify yourself." The footsteps stopped. Then, from somewhere off the trail, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Whistling. A tune I recognized but couldn't immediately place, cheerful and wrong in the context of this dark forest. It was coming from multiple directions surrounding me, and I realized with a sick jolt of recognition what the song was. "The Wheels on the Bus," the same tune Julia's father had heard in his dream the night his kids disappeared. I should have run. Every survival instinct I had was telling me to get back to the truck, to radio for backup, to get the hell out of these woods. But I was also a ranger, trained to investigate, to confront, to protect. So instead of running, I moved toward the sound, stepping off the trail into the dense undergrowth. The whistling continued, staying just ahead of me, leading me deeper. I followed it for maybe 50 yards before I realized what was happening. I was being herded, guided, led exactly where something wanted me to go. I stopped walking and pulled out my GPS. The screen glowed blue in the darkness, showing my position relative to the trail. I was heading directly toward the clearing. Of course I was. The whistling stopped immediately, like whatever was making it knew I'd figured out the game. The forest went completely silent. No wind, no insects, nothing. That's when I felt it. A presence. Not malevolent exactly, but vast and ancient and utterly inhuman. It was watching me, evaluating me, deciding what to do with me. My radio crackled with static, and through the noise I swore I heard a voice, whispering, inviting. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I turned and ran back toward the trail, branches whipping my face, roots trying to trip me, my flashlight bouncing crazily off the trees. Behind me, the whistling started again, but now it was laughing. Not human laughter, something that mimicked the sound without understanding what it meant. I burst back onto Old Mill Road and sprinted for my truck, not looking back, not slowing down until I had metal and glass between me and whatever was in those woods. I sat in the truck for 20 minutes, hands shaking, trying to slow my breathing. My radio was still hissing with static, and I could hear that voice underneath it, faint but persistent, calling, inviting. I turned the radio off and drove back to ranger housing, checking my rearview mirror the entire way, half expecting to see something following me down the mountain. When I finally got home, I locked every door and window, knowing it wouldn't make any difference if that thing really wanted to get in. The next morning, I called in sick. Bill didn't question it. Probably figured I was shaken up from the Julia Corbin case and needed a day to decompress. I spent the morning researching, diving deeper into park records, looking for any mention of unusual activity in Sector 7. What I found was a pattern of suppression. Reports filed and then redacted. Investigations started and then quietly closed. Rangers who asked too many questions getting reassigned or choosing to retire early. The Park Service knew something was happening in that clearing, and they'd been covering it up for decades. I found one more piece of the puzzle buried in an archived newspaper from 1952. A local article about a missing logger named Thomas Mercer, who'd been working in the area that would eventually become the national park. He'd gone into the woods one morning and never come back. Search parties found his tools arranged in a neat pile at the base of an old-growth redwood, but no sign of Thomas himself. One of the searchers, a man named Albert Cross, had given an interview to the paper. "We found his boots set out like he'd stepped right out of them and kept walking barefoot," Cross had said. And the strangest thing, there was this spot on the ground, maybe 6 feet across, where nothing would grow. Just bare earth, dry as bone, warm to the touch even though it was December. We marked the spot and told folks to stay clear of it. Something wasn't right about that place. I sat back and stared at the screen. 1952. That meant whatever was in that clearing had been active for at least 70 years, probably much longer. And it was still there, still taking people, still making them sit and wait and stare at nothing while something happened to them that they could never remember. But why? What was it doing to them? And more importantly, what would happen to someone who didn't wake up in a hospital bed 3 days later? What would happen to someone who stayed? My phone rang, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was Garcia from the EMT team. "Riley, you need to get to the hospital. It's Julia Corbin. Something's wrong." I was in my truck and halfway to Eureka before Garcia finished explaining. Julia had been doing fine, showing steady improvement, getting ready to be discharged. Then, around 8 that morning, she'd stopped responding to questions, just sat up in bed, staring at the wall, lips moving silently. The same catatonic state we'd found her in. Except this time she was saying something, over and over, the same phrase, too quiet for the nurses to make out. When I got to her room, there were 2 nurses and a doctor standing around her bed, looking worried and confused. Julia was sitting upright, perfectly still, eyes fixed on the window that looked out over the parking lot toward the distant tree line. Her lips were moving in that familiar rhythm, and I moved closer, leaning in to hear what she was saying. My blood went ice cold. She was repeating 2 words, soft as a breath, endless as a heartbeat. "Come back, come back, come back." The doctor pulled me aside. "This started about an hour ago. All her vitals are normal, no signs of seizure or stroke. It's like she's in a trance. We've tried everything. Verbal stimulation, physical contact, even smelling salts. Nothing breaks through." I looked back at Julia, at her unseeing eyes and moving lips, and I knew with absolute certainty what was happening. The clearing wasn't done with her. Whatever had touched her out there, whatever had held her for 3 days, it was calling her back. "How long until she's medically stable enough to be moved?" I asked. The doctor frowned. "Moved where? She needs psychiatric evaluation, possibly medication." I cut him off. "How long?" The doctor studied my face and seemed to recognize something there, some desperate determination that made him reconsider arguing. "A few hours. We'd need to run some more tests, make sure she's not a danger to herself." I nodded. "Do it, and when she's cleared, I'm taking her somewhere safe." I spent those hours making calls, pulling in favors, arranging something that was probably going to cost me my job. But I didn't care anymore. This wasn't about regulations or protocols. This was about stopping something that had been preying on people for longer than anyone wanted to admit. By the time the hospital cleared Julia for release, I had a plan. It was risky, maybe stupid, but it was the only thing I could think of that might break whatever hold that clearing had on her. I was going to take Julia Corbin back into the redwoods, but this time she wouldn't be alone, and this time we were going to get answers, even if it killed us. I signed Julia out of the hospital against medical advice, which meant filling out a small mountain of paperwork absolving them of responsibility if something went wrong. The doctor argued with me for 20 minutes, but Julia herself settled it. She'd snapped out of her trance around noon, exhausted and terrified with no memory of the episode. When I told her my plan, she looked at me like I was insane. Then she said yes. "If I don't do this, it'll just keep happening," she said quietly, pulling on the clothes I'd brought her. I can feel it pulling at me. Even now, awake, I can feel it, like a hook in my chest, tugging me back toward those trees. If we don't end this, I'll walk back into that forest on my own eventually. At least this way I won't be alone. We left Eureka at 3 in the afternoon, giving us maybe 4 hours of daylight. I'd called in every favor I had, contacted Morrison at the sheriff's department, got Patricia to cover for me at the station, even reached out to a colleague who specialized in SAR operations. His name was Marcus Williams, and he'd agreed to position himself at the trailhead with emergency equipment. Not backup exactly, but insurance. If Julia and I didn't check in by dawn, he'd come looking. The drive to Old Mill Road felt longer than it should have. Julia sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, one hand pressed against her sternum like she was trying to hold something in, or keep something out. "Tell me about the others," she said finally. "The people before me. What happened to them after?" I told her what I knew. Claire Duval had left California and never came back. Last I could find was a forwarding address in Maine from 1978. The 2008 hiker had recovered physically, but his family reported personality changes. He'd become withdrawn, obsessed with forests, spending weeks at a time camping alone. The 2014 backpacker had committed suicide 6 months after her experience. Jumped from the Golden Gate Bridge. Julia absorbed this in silence, then said, "I won't let it take me like that. Whatever's in that clearing, whatever it wants, I'd rather face it directly than spend the rest of my life feeling it pull at me." There was a steel in her voice that hadn't been there before. Whatever had happened to her in those missing 3 days, it had changed her, hardened something that used to be soft. We parked at the gate and geared up. I'd brought enough equipment for a full overnight expedition: tents, food, water, first aid, emergency beacon, flares, my service weapon. Julia carried a pack too, lighter than mine, and I noticed she'd tucked something into her jacket pocket. A small knife. Smart. We stood at the edge of the road, looking into the tunnel of trees, and I asked her one last time if she was sure. She nodded. "Let's go find out what the hell wants me so badly." The walk to the clearing took 40 minutes, following the same path I'd taken when I found her. Daylight made it less terrifying, but no less oppressive. The redwoods towered over us, their canopy so dense that we walked in permanent twilight. Julia moved with purpose, no hesitation, like her body remembered the way even if her mind didn't. When we reached the spot where I'd found her backpack, she paused, touching the tree trunk. "This feels familiar," she said. "Not a memory, just a feeling." We pushed deeper, and I could feel it too, that presence I'd sensed during my night visit, watching, waiting. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no insects, just the sound of our boots and breathing. Then we broke through the tree line into the clearing, and Julia stopped so abruptly I almost ran into her. "This is it," she whispered. "This is where I was." The clearing looked exactly as I remembered, a perfect circle of open ground, surrounded by ancient redwoods, their trunks scarred and massive. And in the center, that spot of bare earth where Julia had been sitting. She walked toward it like a woman in a dream, and I followed close, my hand on my radio. We stood at the edge of the bare patch, and I could feel the warmth radiating up from the ground. Julia knelt down, pressing her palm against the earth. "It's alive," she said, "not the ground, something underneath it, something old." Then she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. Riley, I remember. Not everything, but fragments. It wanted to show me something. The trees. They're not just trees. They're witnesses, recorders. Everything that happens here they remember, and something is using them to communicate. Before I could respond, the temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Our breath became visible, frost forming on the vegetation around the clearing's edge. Julia stood up, backing away from the bare patch, and that's when I saw it. The ground was moving, not breaking apart, just shifting, like something was pressing up from underneath. The earth bulged upward, forming a shape. A hand, then another, followed by arms, shoulders, a head emerging from the soil like it was water. A figure pulling itself up out of the ground. It wasn't human, but it wore a human shape. Tall, maybe 7 feet, composed entirely of intertwined roots and bark and moss. Its face was a suggestion, hollows where eyes should be, a crack that might have been a mouth. It stood there in the center of the clearing, water and dirt streaming off its form, and I understood with perfect clarity that this thing was old. Older than the trees, older than the forest, older than anything that had a right to still exist in the modern world. Julia didn't scream. She just stared at it, and then she said the most chilling thing I'd ever heard. "I know you." The figure tilted its head, studying her, and when it spoke, the voice came from everywhere and nowhere. The trees, the ground, the air itself. You were invited, you answered, but you left too soon. Its attention shifted to me. You were not invited, you came anyway. Curiosity. It drives your kind to our thresholds repeatedly. "What do you want with her?" I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. The figure seemed to consider the question. Want is too simple. She heard the calling because she was ready to hear it. Her kind sees us now only in stories, in fears, in things dismissed. But some still listen when the old places speak. She sat in our circle. She saw what we offered. Memory, witness, permanence. But her mind was not prepared. She fled back to herself. Julia took a step forward. "What are you?" The figure's hollow eyes fixed on her. "We are what remains when everything else has grown and died and grown again. We are the keepers of what the forest remembers. Your kind built stories about us once. Spirits, guardians, things with many names. Now you forget, and in forgetting, you wander into our circles unprepared." Its root fingers gestured at the clearing. "This place is a threshold. Those who sit in our circle may see what the trees have witnessed. Centuries of life and death and life again. But your minds are fragile. They break under the weight of so much memory." I thought about the others. Claire, the hiker, the backpacker. What happens to the people who don't wake up? The figure was silent for a long moment. They become part of the memory, absorbed into the witness. Their consciousness spreads through root and branch, experiencing everything and nothing. Some call it peace, others call it oblivion. We do not judge which it is. Julia's voice was shaking. "Why do you call people here? Why invite them into something that breaks them?" For the first time, the figure seemed almost sad. "We do not call, the forest calls. We are merely its voice. And those who come are those who already hear it. People who feel the pull of the deep woods, who sense there is something beyond the edges of your brief lives. We offer them a choice, though they rarely understand it as such, to witness eternity or return to their fleeting existence. Most choose return, broken but alive. Some choose to stay." I realized what it was saying. Thomas Mercer, the logger from 1952. He stayed. The figure nodded slowly. He understood the offer. He chose witness over brevity. His consciousness touches every tree in this valley now. He experiences the passage of seasons, the growth of saplings, the fall of the old. He is content. I felt sick. That wasn't peace. It was dissolution, the complete loss of individual self. But the figure seemed to genuinely believe it was offering something valuable. Julia surprised me by asking, "Can I choose? Can I come back here, sit in the circle, and actually understand what you're showing me this time?" The figure regarded her with what might have been approval. "You may. But understand, to witness truly means to surrender yourself. Your memories will become our memories. Your perspective will expand beyond your ability to contain it. You will become part of the threshold, and others who sit in this circle will experience your life as you experience those who came before." "That's not a choice," I said angrily. "That's obliteration dressed up as enlightenment." The figure turned to me. "Is it? Your kind fragments yourself endlessly. Photographs, recordings, written words, digital echoes. You scatter your consciousness across time and space, desperately trying to persist beyond your span. We offer true persistence, union with something greater. But yes, the individual self is lost. Whether that is obliteration or transcendence depends on what you value." Julia looked at me, and I could see the war in her eyes. Part of her wanted it, wanted to understand, to be part of something eternal, to escape the feeling of being pulled back into this clearing. But another part, the human part that valued her individual life, her memories, her identity, was horrified. "I need time," she finally said. The figure nodded. "The threshold remains. When you're ready to choose, you will know where to find us." Then it sank back into the earth, roots and bark dissolving into the soil, until nothing remained but the bare patch of warm ground. The temperature returned to normal. The oppressive silence lifted, and I could hear birds again in the distance. Julia collapsed, and I caught her, both of us sitting on the edge of the clearing, processing what we'd just witnessed. We stayed there for an hour, talking through it, making sure she was okay. Julia decided she wouldn't come back. "I'll feel that pull for the rest of my life," she said. "But I'd rather feel it and remain myself than lose myself to become part of something I don't fully understand. Maybe that makes me a coward." I assured her it made her human. We hiked back to the truck as the sun set, checked in with Marcus, who was visibly relieved, and drove back to civilization in exhausted silence. I wrote my report exactly as it happened, knowing it would be filed away and forgotten like all the others. Bill called me into his office the next day, and I expected to be fired. Instead, he just looked tired. "You saw it," he said. Not a question. I nodded. It offered Julia a choice. She said no. Bill leaned back in his chair. "Good. Most people who see it and survive make that choice. But the ones who say yes, they're why we keep Sector 7 restricted. Every few decades, someone accepts the offer, and when they do, the forest seems to expand its influence. More clearings appear. More people hear the calling." "Why don't we just close the park?" I asked. Bill laughed bitterly. "Close a national forest? On what grounds? Because ancient forest spirits are recruiting people to become one with nature? They'd have me committed. No, we do what we've always done. We watch, we warn, we document, and we hope that most people, like Julia, choose to stay human." I returned to regular patrol the next week, avoiding Sector 7 by unspoken agreement. Julia went back to Berkeley, started therapy, tried to rebuild her life. We stayed in touch, calls every few weeks, checking in, making sure she was okay. She told me the pull never went away completely, but it faded to a background whisper she could live with. She stopped camping, stopped hiking in dense forests. Some wounds don't heal. You just learn to live with them. As for me, I still work these woods. I still find people who've wandered off trail, still run search and rescue operations, still write reports that get filed and forgotten. But now I know what's really out here. Not just mountain lions and exposure and human error, something older, something that sees us as temporary flickers of consciousness that might, if we're willing, be absorbed into something eternal. The forest keeps calling. Some people answer. And those of us who know can only watch and try to save the ones who want to be saved. I drive past Old Mill Road sometimes, looking down that tunnel of trees, wondering how many people over the centuries have sat in that clearing and made their choice. Wondering how many of them are still there, in some form, experiencing the slow passage of seasons through root and branch. Patricia was right to be afraid, but fear isn't enough. You have to understand what you're afraid of, why it's there, what it offers. Only then can you choose to walk away and mean it. Julia sent me a letter last month. She's engaged, planning a wedding in wine country, far from any old-growth forests. She said she still thinks about the clearing sometimes, still wonders what she would have experienced if she'd stayed, but she's grateful she didn't. I'd rather live one complete human life, she wrote, than spend eternity as a fragment of something I can't fully comprehend. Thank you for giving me the chance to choose. I keep that letter in my desk at the ranger station. On the bad days, when I'm processing another missing person report, another unexplained disappearance, another case that'll be filed and forgotten, I read it. It reminds me why we do this. Not to stop the forest. You can't stop something that's been here since before humans had language. But to make sure people understand they have a choice, and that choosing their own brief, flawed, entirely human existence is valid, maybe even noble. The redwoods will outlive us all. The clearing will remain, threshold between one kind of existence and another. And somewhere in those trees, woven into their memory, are all the people who said yes. I hope they found what they were looking for. As for me, I'll keep walking these trails, flashlight in hand, radio on my belt, staying firmly on this side of the threshold. Some invitations are meant to be declined. When the call came in, it was 1:47 p.m. I was finishing my patrol on the North Ridge when that voice I recognized from 8 years of experience came over the radio. The voice that signaled something worse lurking beneath the controlled urgency. Perrin, there's a problem at Cathedral Grove. One person is missing from a group of 5 hikers. They need urgent help. I'm Grant Perrin, and I've been working California's coastal redwoods long enough to know that one missing can mean anything from someone who wandered 20 feet off trail to take a photo to a body we won't find for weeks. The Cathedral Grove Trail is one of our most popular routes, well-marked, moderate difficulty, heavy foot traffic during peak season. People don't just disappear from trails like that. Not usually. I radioed back my ETA and started hiking toward the rendezvous point, my mind already running through the protocol. First, 72 hours are critical in any search operation. After that, you're looking at exponentially decreasing odds of a positive outcome. The afternoon sun was filtering through the canopy in those cathedral rays that give the grove its name, but down here on the forest floor, it was already moving toward twilight. That's the thing about redwoods. They create their own weather, their own light, their own rules. When I reached the group, I could immediately identify the leader. She was standing slightly apart from the others, arms crossed, jaw tight, radiating the kind of controlled panic that comes from someone who knows they're responsible for what's happening. The other 3 were clustered together on a fallen log, looking exhausted and scared. I approached the leader first, keeping my voice calm and professional. I'm Ranger Perrin. You reported someone missing from your group." She nodded quickly, extending her hand in an automatic gesture before realizing the absurdity of formal introductions in this context. "Ivy Raines, we were a group of 5. Marcus Flynn hasn't been with us for at least 2 hours, maybe more. We didn't realize he was gone until we stopped for a water break." 2 hours. That wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great either. I pulled out my notebook and started gathering information, the questions coming automatically after years of this work. "When did you last see Marcus?" Ivy's face tightened further. "That's the thing. None of us remember specifically seeing him after we took the wrong turn. We got confused at a junction about 3 miles back. The trail markers were damaged, and we couldn't tell which path was the main route. We thought we were still on Cathedral Grove, but everything started looking unfamiliar." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Damaged trail markers. We'd had some vandalism earlier in the season, but we'd replaced all the affected signs. At least, I thought we had. "Show me where you think you made the wrong turn." Ivy pulled out her phone, opening a hiking app with a GPS track. I studied the route she'd traced, and my unease deepened. They'd veered onto the old Fern Creek Trail, a path we'd officially closed 3 years ago due to erosion and instability. The markers should have been clear. Bright yellow, trail-closed signs, barrier posts, the works. "Walk me through exactly what happened at that junction," I said, already suspecting what I'd find but needing to hear it confirmed. One of the other hikers, a guy named Tom, spoke up. The main trail marker post was broken off at the base. Just snapped wood, lying on the ground. There were 2 other paths splitting off from there, and neither of them had clear markers. We thought the broken one might have pointed to the main trail, so we took the path that seemed most worn, broken at the base, not weathered, not gradually deteriorated. Broken. I made a note to examine the site myself as soon as we had Marcus secured. "And none of you noticed Marcus was missing until the water break?" The question came out more sharply than I intended, and I saw Ivy flinch. She knew how bad that looked, how a competent hiking group should never lose track of a member for that long. "We were spread out," she said defensively. "The trail got narrow in places, and we were going single file. Marcus was usually in the back. He liked to stop and take photos. We just assumed he was behind us. When we stopped, I did a head count and realized we were 1 short. We backtracked for maybe 20 minutes, calling his name, but there was no sign of him. I radioed dispatch and requested a full search and rescue team, giving them our coordinates and a preliminary plan. Then I turned back to Ivy and her group. I need you to think carefully. Did Marcus seem distressed about anything? Did he mention wanting to separate from the group? Explore on his own? Anything like that?" The 4 of them exchanged glances, and I caught something passing between them, some shared knowledge they weren't immediately offering up. It was the woman sitting next to Tom who finally spoke. "Marcus and Ivy had an argument this morning, before we started the hike. It wasn't a big deal, just stress, but he was quiet all morning." Ivy's face flushed. "It wasn't an argument. It was a discussion about route planning. Marcus wanted to take a different trail, something more challenging. I said no because not everyone in our group has that experience level. He was frustrated, but he agreed to stick with the plan." I noted this, but didn't push. Relationship dynamics could matter in a missing person case, but right now, the priority was finding Marcus before nightfall. "Okay, I'm going to need you all to stay here with my colleague who's en route. You'll give him your full statements and help pinpoint the exact locations where you last definitely saw Marcus. I'm going back to that junction to assess the trail markers and start a preliminary search pattern." Ivy stepped forward. "I'm coming with you. I know the route we took, and I can show you exactly where we went wrong." I started to refuse. Standard protocol is to keep witnesses separated and stationary, but something in her eyes stopped me. Guilt, yes, but also a fierce determination that told me she wouldn't be easily dissuaded. And honestly, having someone who knew the exact path could save valuable time. Fine, but you follow my lead. Stay where I can see you, and if I tell you to do something, you do it immediately. Understood? She nodded, already shouldering her pack. I gave quick instructions to the others about staying put and keeping their phones on. Then Ivy and I headed back up the trail at a fast clip. The sun was definitely lower now, shadows lengthening between the massive tree trunks, and I found myself calculating how much searchable daylight we had left. Maybe 3 hours. 4 if we were lucky. We made good time back to the junction, and the moment I saw it, I knew my instincts had been right. The main Cathedral Grove marker post wasn't just broken, it had been deliberately destroyed. The wood was splintered in a way that suggested repeated impacts with something heavy, and the metal trail markers that should have been mounted on it were nowhere in sight. Someone had taken tools to this post and removed any indication of which path was the correct route. "This is vandalism," Ivy said quietly, stating the obvious. I was already examining the other 2 path markers, or rather the absence of them. The left fork, which led to the closed Fern Creek Trail, should have had a barrier and warning signs. Nothing. The right fork, which was actually a maintenance access road not meant for hikers, should have been clearly marked as restricted. Also, nothing. Someone had systematically removed or destroyed every marker at this junction, creating a situation where confused hikers would inevitably take the wrong path. I photographed everything from multiple angles, already thinking about the law enforcement investigation that would follow. But that was tomorrow's problem. Today's problem was finding Marcus Flynn before the temperature dropped and the redwood fog rolled in. "Which path did your group take?" I asked Ivy. She pointed to the left fork. Fern Creek, as I'd suspected. I pulled out my map and traced the trail mentally. It ran roughly parallel to Cathedral Grove for about 2 miles before diverging sharply east toward a steep ravine system. If Marcus had gotten separated somewhere along that stretch, there were a lot of places he could have ended up. We started down the Fern Creek Trail, and immediately I could see why the group hadn't realized their error sooner. The path was still visible, still reasonably clear, maintained enough by deer traffic and the occasional unauthorized hiker that it looked legitimate. But there were signs if you knew what to look for. Erosion damage washing out sections of the trail, vegetation encroaching more than it should, the absence of the distance markers we installed on all active trails. Every 100 yards or so, I'd stop and call out for Marcus, my voice echoing strangely in the dense forest. "Marcus Flynn, this is Park Ranger Perrin. If you can hear me, call out or make noise." Nothing but the sound of wind in the canopy high above us and the occasional bird call. Ivy was quiet, conserving her energy, but I could feel the tension radiating off her. About a mile in, I spotted something that made me slow down. Tracks. Fresh boot prints in a muddy section of trail, heading in the same direction we were going. I knelt down to examine them. Size 11 or 12, deep tread pattern consistent with hiking boots. "Are these Marcus's?" I asked. Ivy crouched next to me, studying the prints. "Could be. He was wearing Merrill boots, gray and black, but I don't know the tread pattern." I stood up and followed the tracks with my eyes. They continued down the trail for another 20 feet, then veered sharply off to the right, into the undergrowth. Not the stumbling deviation of someone who'd gotten disoriented, a deliberate turn, like he'd seen something that interested him or was trying to take a shortcut. "Stay behind me," I instructed Ivy, then began following the tracks into the brush. The vegetation here was thick, sword ferns, salal, masses of sorrel covering the ground. Not impenetrable, but enough to make travel difficult and slow. The boot prints became harder to follow, just occasional crushed vegetation and disturbed leaf litter. But there was definitely a path of disturbance leading deeper into the forest, away from any established trail. This was exactly the kind of decision that gets people into trouble in the wilderness, leaving a known path to follow an impulse. We pushed through maybe 50 yards of undergrowth when I saw it, a clearing ahead, and something bright blue visible against the brown and green of the forest floor. Marcus's backpack. I held up a hand to stop Ivy, then approached the pack carefully, scanning the area for any sign of Marcus himself. The clearing was small, maybe 30 feet across, ringed by massive redwood trunks. The pack was sitting upright, almost carefully positioned at the base of one of the trees. I pulled on gloves before touching it, protocol, in case this became a criminal investigation, and carefully opened the main compartment. Standard hiking gear, water bottles, energy bars, first aid kit, rain jacket, headlamp. But tucked into a side pocket, I found something unexpected. An envelope, already open, with a letter inside. The paper was nice, heavy cream stock, not the cheap stuff. The handwriting was feminine, precise, and only half the letter had been written before it cut off mid-sentence. I started reading, and immediately knew this was going to complicate everything. "Ivy," I said slowly, "did you know Marcus was engaged?" I heard her sharp intake of breath behind me. "What?" "No, he never mentioned." She trailed off, and when I turned to look at her, her face had gone pale. "Let me see that." I handed her the letter, watching her face as she read. The color drained further from her cheeks, and her hands started shaking. The letter was from someone named Claire, and it was clear from the content that she and Marcus had been in a serious relationship. But it wasn't a love letter, it was a breakup letter. Or it was supposed to be. The writing stopped abruptly, in the middle of explaining why Claire couldn't continue the relationship. The pen trail just ending mid-word, as if she'd been interrupted, or as if Marcus had been interrupted while reading it. "I didn't know," Ivy said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "He never said anything about someone back home. We've been—" She stopped herself, but I could fill in the blanks. The argument this morning suddenly made more sense. Marcus wanting to take a different trail, tension between him and the group leader. Maybe he'd been trying to avoid exactly this kind of awkward proximity. "When did he get this letter?" I asked. Ivy shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe it was waiting for him somewhere? We've been camping for 3 days, no mail delivery out here." I checked the envelope. No postmark, no stamp. Hand-delivered or picked up somewhere. "Did your group stop anywhere before starting the hike today? Any visitor centers, ranger stations, post offices?" Ivy thought for a moment. "We gassed up in Oric this morning. Marcus went into the convenience store to get coffee. He could have picked something up there if someone left it for him." I bagged the letter as evidence and continued searching the pack. That's when I found the second piece of the puzzle. A folded map. Not one of our official park maps, but a hand-drawn sketch on notebook paper. It showed the junction where the trail markers were destroyed, but instead of marking the correct path, it highlighted the Fern Creek Trail and had a note in the margin. "Follow this route. Keep going until you hit the ravine overlook. We need to talk. See." The implications hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a random disappearance. Marcus had been deliberately led off the main trail onto a dangerous, closed path by someone who knew the area well enough to draw a detailed map, and that someone, presumably Claire, the letter writer, had arranged to meet him out here. But if they'd met, where were they now? And if they hadn't met, where was Marcus? I radioed dispatch with an update, keeping my voice neutral and factual despite the sick feeling in my gut. Dispatch, Perrin. I've located the missing hiker's backpack, but no sign of the hiker. Evidence suggests this may be more than a simple lost hiker situation. Request additional law enforcement response and expansion of search parameters. The response was immediate and professional, confirming that Sheriff Morrison was already en route with additional deputies. Ivy was still staring at the letter and map, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. I should have known something was wrong. He was distracted all morning, checking his phone constantly, looking at the trail map over and over. I thought he was just being difficult about the route choice, but he was planning to split off on his own. Her voice broke slightly. If I'd paid more attention, if we'd noticed sooner that he was gone, don't, I said firmly. Second-guessing yourself doesn't help Marcus now. What helps is thinking clearly about what you observed. Did he have his phone with him? Ivy nodded. Yeah, everyone had their phones. We were using them for photos and GPS tracking. That was good. Phones could be tracked, assuming there was any signal out here. I pulled out my own phone and wasn't surprised to see 0 bars. The redwood canopy blocks cell signals in most areas, and the canyon topography made it even worse. I stood up and surveyed the clearing again, this time looking for any indication of where Marcus might have gone from here. The obvious answer was toward the ravine overlook that the map mentioned, but that was at least another mile of rough terrain, and the daylight was fading fast. The search and rescue team would arrive within the hour, and we'd have to make a decision about whether to continue the search after dark or wait until morning. That's when I saw the second set of tracks. Smaller than the first, lighter tread, but definitely human. Someone else had been in this clearing, and recently, the tracks were crisp, undisturbed by wind or rain. I knelt down to examine them more closely, my mind racing through the possibilities. Claire? Someone else? Had Marcus met his mysterious correspondent here, or had someone else found his abandoned pack? We need to keep moving, I said, standing up. But slowly, carefully. If Marcus continued toward the ravine, that's where we need to focus the search. But if something happened to him between here and there, I didn't finish the sentence. Ivy was smart enough to understand what I was implying. The Fern Creek Trail was closed for a reason. Unstable terrain, washouts, steep drops hidden by vegetation. One wrong step could turn a hike into a body recovery. We continued following the tracks, moving through increasingly difficult terrain. The forest floor was covered in a thick layer of duff, decades of accumulated needles, leaves, and decomposing wood. That muffled sound and made each step uncertain. The redwoods around us grew so close together in places that we had to turn sideways to pass between them, their massive trunks creating a maze of organic barriers. The tracks led us steadily upward, climbing a gentle slope that I knew from my map study would eventually level out at the ravine overlook. It was one of the most spectacular and dangerous viewpoints in the park, a sheer drop of nearly 300 feet with nothing but crumbling rock and a few determined trees clinging to the cliff face. We'd closed public access specifically because we'd had 2 near fatalities there in the past 5 years, and someone had deliberately led Marcus Flynn to it. As we climbed, I started finding more evidence of recent passage. Broken branches at chest height, disturbed vegetation, places where someone had grabbed onto trees or rocks for support. But it was definitely more than one person now. I could distinguish at least 2 different patterns of movement, confirming my suspicion that Marcus hadn't been alone for at least part of this journey. The sound reached us before we crested the rise. Voices. Distant but unmistakable. I held up a hand to stop Ivy, then moved forward carefully, trying to get a visual before we revealed our presence. As we approached the ridgeline, I could make out 2 figures standing near the edge of the ravine overlook. One was clearly Marcus Flynn. I could see his gray and black hiking boots, his build matching Ivy's description. The other figure was smaller, feminine, wearing dark clothes and positioned between Marcus and the trail back. I was about to call out when the woman's voice carried clearly through the afternoon air, sharp with emotion I couldn't quite identify. "You can't just ignore this, Marcus. You can't pretend it didn't happen." Marcus's response was lower, harder to hear, but the body language was clear. Defensive, backing away, hands raised in either surrender or warning. And behind him was nothing but 300 feet of empty air and hard ground. "Park Ranger," I called out, deliberately loud and authoritative. "Step away from the edge, both of you." Both figures spun toward us, and I finally got a clear look at the woman's face. Mid-20s, blonde hair pulled back, features contorted with a mixture of anger and desperation. Claire, presumably. But what I saw in her eyes made my hand instinctively move toward the radio on my belt. This wasn't just a difficult conversation between ex-partners. This was something much more dangerous. Marcus took advantage of Claire's distraction to take several quick steps away from the cliff edge, but his position was still precarious. One wrong move and he'd go over. I moved forward slowly, Ivy hanging back as I'd instructed, trying to position myself where I could intervene if necessary. "I'm Ranger Perrin. Your hiking group reported you missing, Marcus. We need to get you back to safety." Claire's attention snapped back to Marcus, and I saw her hand move to her jacket pocket. "He's not going anywhere until we finish this conversation. Tell them, Marcus, tell them what you did." Her voice cracked on the last words, and I realized she was crying. Tears streaming down her face even as her expression remained hard and angry. "Ma'am, I need you to keep your hands where I can see them," I said firmly, using the tone that usually cut through emotional situations. Claire's hand emerged from her pocket holding not a weapon, but a crumpled piece of paper, another letter, or possibly a photo. "He was going to marry me," she said, her voice rising. "We had plans, a life, and then he just disappeared. No explanation, no goodbye, just gone. Do you know what that does to someone?" Marcus finally found his voice. "Claire, please. This isn't the place. We can talk somewhere safe, somewhere," but Claire cut him off with a bitter laugh. "Somewhere civilized? Somewhere you can have witnesses and escape routes? No. You brought me into this forest with your lies, Marcus. You said you wanted to reconnect, said you'd made a mistake, and I believed you. Again." The pieces were falling into place now, but in a way that made the situation even more complicated. The destroyed trail markers, the carefully drawn map, the staged meeting point. None of it was Claire luring Marcus into danger. It was Marcus who'd orchestrated this, drawing Claire out to an isolated location under false pretenses. And now, she was the one who was angry, hurt, and standing between him and a 300-foot drop. "Ma'am, Claire, I understand you're upset," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "But right now, I need both of you to move away from the cliff edge. We can sort out everything else after everyone is safe. Can you do that for me?" I was slowly closing the distance, trying to get into a position where I could physically intervene if necessary. But the terrain was treacherous, loose rock and crumbling soil, and I had to be careful not to trigger a collapse that would send one or both of them over the edge. Claire looked at me, really looked at me for the first time, and I saw the moment the adrenaline started to wear off and reality set in. Her face crumpled, the anger giving way to exhaustion and despair. "I just wanted answers," she said quietly. "I just wanted to know why." The hand holding the letter dropped to her side, and her shoulders sagged. Marcus used the moment to put more distance between them, and I moved in quickly to position myself as a buffer. "You'll get your answers," I assured her, though I had no authority to promise any such thing. "But not here. Not like this. Let's get back to the trail, get somewhere safe, and we'll figure out the rest. I extended my hand toward her, a physical gesture of trust and assistance. After a long moment, Claire took it, and I carefully guided her away from the cliff edge, my other hand steadying her as we navigated the unstable ground. Once we had both Claire and Marcus on stable ground, away from the cliff edge, the immediate crisis shifted from physical danger to something more complicated. Marcus was trying to talk to Claire, his voice low and placating, but she wouldn't look at him. She was staring at the forest floor, shoulders hunched, the earlier anger replaced by something that looked like shock. Ivy had caught up to us and was standing at a careful distance, her face unreadable as she watched the scene unfold. I radioed our position to dispatch, confirming that we'd located Marcus alive and unharmed, but that the situation was complex and we'd need law enforcement presence for statements. Sheriff Morrison's voice came back crisp and efficient, saying they were approximately 15 minutes out from our location. 15 minutes. It felt like both too long and not nearly enough time to process what had just happened. "I need both of you to stay here," I said, looking between Marcus and Claire. "Nobody moves until the sheriff arrives. Understood?" Marcus nodded quickly, his relief at being away from the cliff edge visible in every line of his body. Claire just stood there, arms wrapped around herself, trembling slightly. The temperature was dropping as the sun continued its descent behind the massive redwoods, and I realized she wasn't dressed appropriately for an extended stay in the forest. Her jacket was too light, her shoes more suited to city streets than wilderness terrain. "How long have you been out here?" I asked her gently. Claire looked up at me, and I saw that her eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted. "Since early this morning. I drove up from Sacramento last night, got here around 6 a.m. Marcus sent me detailed instructions, where to park, which trail to take, where to wait." Her voice was flat, emotionless, like she was recounting someone else's story. "He said he'd meet me at 8. When he didn't show up, I kept waiting and waiting. I thought maybe I'd gotten the location wrong, so I started looking around, following any trails I could find." Marcus flinched at her words but didn't contradict them. I pulled out the hand-drawn map I'd found in his backpack. "Did you draw this?" Claire shook her head. "No." Marcus sent it to me with the letter. He said the park was complicated to navigate, and he didn't want me to get lost. The irony of that statement hung heavy in the air. Marcus had given Claire detailed directions to an isolated, dangerous location, then apparently never intended to show up. Or something had prevented him from showing up on time. "Marcus," I said, turning my attention to him, "I need you to explain what happened this morning, from the beginning. And I want the truth, because anything you say now is going to be checked against physical evidence and witness statements." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that looked habitual, a nervous tic. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I needed time to think, and Claire kept pushing for answers I didn't have." "So you lured her into the middle of a closed trail in a national forest." Ivy's voice was sharp, cutting through Marcus's attempted explanation. It was the first time she'd spoken since we'd found them, and I could hear layers of betrayal and anger in those words. "You manipulated your entire hiking group, destroyed trail markers to ensure we'd get lost, all so you could have some dramatic confrontation. Do you have any idea how dangerous that is? How illegal?" Marcus's face flushed. "I didn't destroy the trail markers. When I scouted this area last week," he stopped abruptly, seeming to realize he'd just admitted to premeditation. I made a mental note of that admission. "When you scouted this area," I prompted, keeping my voice neutral. Marcus swallowed hard. "I came up here last weekend to check out the trails, see if this would work for what I needed. The markers were already damaged. I just thought it would help ensure my group would take the wrong path if they followed me. If they followed you, Ivy repeated, her voice rising. You wanted us to get lost. You wanted us distracted, searching for you. While you did, what exactly? Had a secret meeting with your ex-fiancé in one of the most dangerous areas of the park. She turned to me. I want to press charges. Whatever we can charge him with, reckless endangerment, false reporting, something. He put all of us at risk for his personal drama. I held up a hand, trying to keep the situation from escalating further. Everyone will have a chance to give their statement to the sheriff. Right now, I need to understand the full scope of what happened so we can determine if there are any ongoing safety concerns. I looked at Claire. You said Marcus asked you to meet him here. Do you have those messages? The communication where he set this up? Claire pulled out her phone with shaking hands. I have texts and emails, going back weeks. She scrolled through them, and I saw pages of messages, long paragraphs interspersed with shorter exchanges. He said he'd made a mistake ending things, that he wanted to talk about getting back together, that we needed to meet somewhere private, away from our normal lives, so we could really focus on each other. Her voice cracked. I believed him. I thought we were going to fix things. I took photos of the message thread with my own phone, making sure to capture dates, times, and content. The messages painted a picture of Marcus deliberately manipulating Claire's emotions, promising reconciliation while simultaneously planning a hiking trip with another woman he was clearly romantically involved with. It was messy, cruel, and potentially criminal depending on what laws applied to emotional manipulation and creating dangerous situations. And when you got here this morning and he didn't show up, why didn't you leave? I asked Claire. Why wait for hours in an unfamiliar forest? Claire's laugh was bitter. Because I'm an idiot who can't let go. Because Marcus has been stringing me along for 8 months, appearing and disappearing from my life, always with some excuse about why we can't be together, but never fully ending things. I thought if I waited long enough, proved I was committed enough, he'd finally choose me. The raw pain in her voice made even Marcus look away. Shame written across his features. This was beyond just a messy breakup. This was systematic emotional abuse, the kind of pattern that left deep psychological scars. I'd seen similar dynamics in domestic situations, where one person maintained control through intermittent reinforcement and manufactured hope. It made me view Claire's earlier behavior at the cliff edge in a different light. Not a dangerous aggressor, but someone who'd been pushed past her breaking point. The sound of voices and footsteps signaled the arrival of the search and rescue team and law enforcement. Sheriff Morrison emerged from the tree line first, followed by 3 deputies and 2 SAR personnel I recognized from previous operations. Morrison was a solid presence, mid-50s, gray-haired, with the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of dealing with difficult situations. He took in the scene with a single comprehensive glance, then approached me. Ranger Perrin, status? I gave him a quick briefing, hitting the key points. Destroyed trail markers, Marcus's deliberate plan to get separated from his group, Claire's presence based on false pretenses, the confrontation at the cliff edge. Morrison listened without interrupting, his expression growing more grave with each detail. When I finished, he nodded once. Right. Let's get everyone back to the trailhead and sort this out properly. Perrin, you and I will take separate statements. Deputies, escort these folks back to the main trail. Carefully. The hike back was tense and quiet. Marcus and Claire were kept separated, each walking with a deputy escort. Ivy stayed near me, and I could feel questions radiating off her, but she had the sense to wait until we were in a more appropriate setting. The rest of Ivy's hiking group was waiting at the junction, where we'd found the destroyed trail markers. looking relieved and confused when we emerged with Marcus in tow. By the time we made it back to the parking area, it was fully dark, the forest around us invisible beyond the range of our flashlights. Morrison had called in additional support, victim services, a crisis counselor, even a representative from the district attorney's office who happened to be on call. What had started as a simple search and rescue was turning into a complex investigation with potential criminal charges. I spent the next 3 hours giving my statement, walking Morrison and the DA representative through everything I'd observed and documented. The destroyed trail markers were photographed and cataloged. Marcus's backpack and the letters inside were seized as evidence. Claire's phone messages were downloaded and preserved. The whole apparatus of law enforcement ground into motion, and I found myself in the strange position of being both a witness and a first responder. Around midnight, Morrison found me in the ranger station office, where I'd been writing up my incident report. "Perrin, got a minute?" I looked up from my laptop, rubbing my tired eyes. "Sure. What's the verdict?" Morrison settled into the chair across from my desk with a heavy sigh. "Complicated. The trail marker destruction, we can probably get him on vandalism and reckless endangerment, though he's claiming he didn't actually damage them, just took advantage of existing damage. Claire's situation is murkier. He lied to her, manipulated her, created an emotionally distressing situation, but none of that is clearly illegal unless we can prove he intended to harm her." "What about endangering his hiking group?" I asked. "He deliberately created a situation where they'd get lost in a closed section of trail." Morrison nodded. "That's our strongest case, reckless endangerment, filing a false report when they called in his disappearance. Possibly fraud, depending on how we interpret his actions. The DA wants to charge him with something, but they're still figuring out what will stick. Meanwhile, Claire's pressing for a restraining order, and Ivy's considering a civil suit for the distress caused to her group." I leaned back in my chair, feeling the exhaustion settle into my bones. What a mess. Morrison made a sound of agreement. "You know what the worst part is? This could have ended so much worse. If Claire had actually pushed him off that cliff, if someone in Ivy's group had gotten seriously injured taking the wrong trail, if you hadn't found them before nightfall, any number of ways this could have turned into a body recovery instead of just a legal nightmare." He was right, and I knew it. We'd been lucky today, but luck wasn't a reliable safety strategy. "What about the trail markers?" I asked. "If Marcus didn't destroy them, who did, and why?" Morrison pulled out his phone and showed me photos from the junction. "We found evidence of tool marks on the broken post, a hatchet or small axe based on the cut patterns. Fresh damage, probably within the last week based on the wood exposure. We're checking with park maintenance to see if anyone reported vandalism before your group encountered it." I made a note to follow up on that. Trail marker vandalism wasn't uncommon. Teenagers looking for thrills, anti-government types making a statement. Occasionally, even rival trail associations marking their preferred routes. But the systematic nature of this destruction, removing multiple markers to create maximum confusion, felt more deliberate. "I want to review our patrol logs for the past 2 weeks," I said. "See if any rangers noticed anything unusual in that area." Morrison stood up, preparing to leave. "Good idea. We'll need a full report from you by end of week. And Perrin, good work today. You kept a volatile situation from escalating, got everyone out safely, and preserved evidence for the investigation. That's solid rangering." I appreciated the acknowledgement, but as Morrison left and I returned to my report, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something. The pieces fit together too neatly in some ways, too messily in others. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind kept replaying the scene at the cliff edge, the look on Claire's face, the way Marcus had backed toward that 300-foot drop. I kept thinking about how differently it could have ended. Around 5 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep and drove back to the park, arriving just as dawn was breaking over the redwoods. The junction with the destroyed trail markers looked different in daylight. Less ominous, but no less troubling. I spent an hour documenting everything Morrison's team might have missed in the darkness, taking measurements, checking sight lines, trying to understand exactly how someone could have destroyed the markers without being noticed. The Cathedral Grove Trail was popular enough that there should have been witnesses, unless the vandalism had happened very early in the morning or late in the evening. I was photographing tool marks on the broken post when I heard footsteps on the trail behind me. I turned to find Ivy approaching, looking as tired as I felt. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. I shook my head. "Too many questions. What are you doing here? I thought you'd have headed home by now." Ivy stopped a few feet away, looking at the destroyed markers. I needed to see it again, in daylight. Try to understand how we missed so many warning signs. "You mean about Marcus?" I said. It wasn't a question. Ivy nodded, her jaw tight. "I've been hiking with groups for 5 years. I pride myself on reading people, on keeping everyone safe, and I completely missed that Marcus was planning something like this. What does that say about my judgment?" I recognized the self-recrimination in her voice. I'd felt it myself plenty of times when situations went sideways. "You can't predict deliberate deception," I told her. "Marcus went out of his way to hide his intentions. That's not a failure on your part." Ivy wasn't convinced. I should have known something was wrong. The argument we had that morning, it wasn't really about trail choices. Marcus was testing me, seeing how much I'd push back, whether I'd give him the freedom to split off on his own, and I just thought he was being difficult. She paused, then said quietly, "We were involved, Marcus and me, not seriously, or at least I didn't think it was serious, just a couple of times over the past few months. Casual, no strings, or so I thought." That added another layer to an already complicated situation. "Does Claire know?" Ivy shook her head. "I don't think so, and I feel terrible about it. If I'd known he had this whole other relationship, this woman he'd been manipulating for months." She stopped, emotion clogging her throat. "I would never have touched him. I'm not that person. But now Claire's been hurt, and Marcus's behavior makes it look like I was part of some conspiracy to deceive her." I didn't have easy answers for that. Ivy was a victim of Marcus's deception too, just in a different way. "You'll need to include that in your statement," I said gently. "The full picture matters for the investigation." Ivy nodded miserably. "I know. I called Morrison this morning and told him I had additional information. He's meeting me at the station in an hour." We stood in silence for a moment, looking at the destroyed markers. Then Ivy said, "That's not the only reason I came back here. Last night, I was going through the photos from our hike, trying to piece together a timeline of when Marcus actually separated from the group. And I found something weird." She pulled out her phone and scrolled through images. Rachel, one of the other hikers, took this photo about 30 minutes after we passed through this junction. The photo showed the trail ahead, a typical snapshot of the redwood forest, but in the background, barely visible through the trees, was a figure. Someone in dark clothing standing off the trail, partially obscured by a massive tree trunk. "I didn't remember seeing anyone else on the trail," Ivy said. "And when I zoomed in," she expanded the image, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The figure was holding something that looked like an axe or hatchet. "When was this taken?" I asked, already pulling out my own phone to photograph Ivy's screen. "Timestamp says 9:43 a.m. We passed through the junction around 9:15. That meant the trail marker vandalism might have happened while Ivy's group was already on the wrong path." Not before they arrived, as I'd assumed, but during their hike. Someone had deliberately trapped them on the closed trail. Did you see this person? Can you identify them? Ivy shook her head. Rachel didn't even notice them when she took the photo. She was focused on the trees, trying to get an artistic shot. It wasn't until I was zooming in and adjusting the exposure that the figure became visible. I studied the photo carefully. The person was too far away and too shadowed for facial recognition, but I could make out general build and clothing. Medium height, bulky jacket, dark pants. Could be anyone. I need to send this to Morrison immediately, I said. This changes everything. If someone was actively sabotaging the trail while your group was on it, we're not just looking at vandalism. We're looking at potentially attempted murder or kidnapping. The words sounded dramatic, but the implications were serious. Someone had deliberately created a dangerous situation for a specific group of hikers. Why? Ivy looked shaken. You think this was about more than Marcus's drama with Claire? That someone else was involved? I considered the possibilities. Maybe, or maybe Marcus had help, or maybe... I stopped, a thought occurring to me that I didn't like. Maybe Marcus wasn't the target at all. Ivy frowned. What do you mean? I pulled up the photo again, studying the figure's position. They're watching your group. Not destroying markers ahead of you, that was already done. They're watching you pass, making sure you take the wrong path. But why? Ivy asked. What would anyone gain from... She stopped, her face going pale. Rachel. The photo was on Rachel's phone initially, right? Ivy nodded slowly. Yes. She was showing everyone pictures from the hike last night. That's how I saw it. I started walking quickly back toward the parking area, Ivy hurrying to keep up. We need to talk to Rachel, now. Where is she? She was staying at the motel in Oric with Tom and Danielle, but Grant, what? I cut her off. Rachel's been married for 3 years, right? You mentioned it yesterday. Ivy nodded, confused. Yeah, to someone named Andrew. What does that have to do with... And then, understanding dawned on her face. Oh, God, you think Andrew destroyed the trail markers? That he was trying to hurt Rachel? I think we need to consider all possibilities, I said, already dialing Morrison's number, including the possibility that Marcus's drama was convenient cover for someone else's intentions. Morrison answered on the second ring, and I quickly briefed him on the photo and my concerns. His response was immediate. I'm sending deputies to the motel now. Don't approach Rachel or any of the others until we have people in place. We waited at the ranger station, tension mounting with each passing minute. Finally, Morrison called back. We have a situation. Andrew Kellerman, Rachel's husband, checked into the same motel last night. Separate room, used a credit card and a different name. Staff didn't connect them. When deputies went to talk to Rachel, Andrew was in her room. They're both being brought in for questioning now. My stomach dropped. Is Rachel okay? Morrison's voice was grim. Physically, yes. Emotionally is another question. Looks like Andrew has been stalking her for months. She'd left him, got a restraining order, changed her name back to her maiden name. The hiking trip was supposed to be part of rebuilding her life, doing things she loved without fear. Andrew figured out where she'd be and decided to make sure she'd get lost in the forest. Permanently. Ivy had been listening to my end of the conversation, and I saw horror dawning on her face as she pieced together what had happened. He tried to kill her. He tried to kill all of us just to get to Rachel. I felt sick. The destroyed trail markers, the closed trail leading toward dangerous terrain, the figure watching to make sure they took the wrong path. It all made terrible sense now. If Ivy's group had continued deeper into the closed section, If night had fallen before they were found, if Rachel had wandered off on her own, any number of scenarios that could have ended in tragedy. "We got lucky," Morrison said, echoing my thoughts from the previous night. "You found them fast, conditions were favorable, no one got seriously hurt. But Perrin, Andrew Kellerman, came equipped for a long stay in the woods. We found camping gear in his car, detailed maps of the closed trail sections, and—" He paused. "A handgun. Licensed, but the intent was clear. He was prepared to wait days if necessary for the right opportunity." I closed my eyes, processing this. What we'd treated as Marcus's selfish manipulation had actually been a near miss with something much darker. "What about Marcus and Claire? Do they know?" Morrison made a disgusted sound. "They know. Marcus is trying to claim he saved the day by drawing attention to the group. Claire's just in shock. The DA is still sorting out charges, but Andrew's looking at attempted murder, stalking, weapons charges, destruction of federal property. He's going away for a long time." After Morrison hung up, Ivy and I sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, she said, "Rachel never said anything. About Andrew, about being afraid, about any of it. She just seemed excited to be hiking again." That was often how it worked with domestic violence survivors, the fear and trauma hidden behind a facade of normalcy, the constant vigilance invisible to outside observers. "She'll need support," I said. "Good therapy, a strong support network. This kind of thing doesn't just go away." Ivy nodded. "I'll be there for her. We all will, the group, I mean. Even though Marcus turned out to be a manipulative jerk, the rest of us are solid." She paused, then added, "I'm done with casual relationships. This whole thing has taught me that secrets and half-truths just create situations where people get hurt. From now on, everything's transparent, or I'm out." Over the next few days, the full story emerged through statements, evidence analysis, and digital forensics. Andrew Kellerman had been stalking Rachel for 8 months, ever since she'd left him and obtained a restraining order. He'd tracked her social media, figured out she was planning a hiking trip, and decided to use the remote location as an opportunity. He'd scouted the trails, identified the most dangerous closed sections, and spent 2 nights destroying trail markers and creating a trap. Marcus's plan to meet Claire had been an unfortunate coincidence, his dramatic manipulation happening to overlap with Andrew's much darker intentions. When the group took the wrong path exactly as Andrew had planned, he'd followed at a distance, waiting for the right moment to isolate Rachel. But Marcus's disappearance had triggered a faster response than Andrew anticipated, bringing rangers and search teams before he could act. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Marcus's selfish behavior had inadvertently saved his entire hiking group, including the woman whose husband was trying to kill her. It didn't make Marcus's actions okay, but it did complicate the moral calculus. He was still charged with reckless endangerment and filing a false report, but the DA decided not to pursue the vandalism charges since Andrew had actually destroyed the markers. Claire filed a restraining order against Marcus and, according to Ivy, was finally in therapy dealing with the months of emotional manipulation. Marcus lost his job. Apparently, his employers took a dim view of his behavior becoming public record and moved out of state. I heard through the grapevine that he was working at a ski resort in Colorado, far from anyone who knew his story. Rachel started a support group for domestic violence survivors who loved outdoor activities, creating a network where people could hike and camp together safely, with trained leaders who understood trauma and security. Ivy became one of those leaders, channeling her guilt and determination into something positive. 3 months after the incident, I was back on patrol in the same section of forest where everything had happened. The trail markers had been replaced, reinforced, and we'd installed several motion-activated cameras to deter future vandalism. The Cathedral Grove Trail was as popular as ever, hikers streaming through to marvel at the ancient redwoods, most of them oblivious to the drama that had unfolded here. I stopped at the junction where Ivy's group had gone wrong, looking at the new markers. They were solid metal posts now, concrete reinforced at the base, with reflective trail signs that were supposed to be virtually indestructible. Morrison had pushed for the upgrade, arguing that the old wooden posts were too easy to vandalize. The Park Service had agreed, and we'd systematically replaced markers throughout the area. But standing there, I couldn't help thinking about how all our efforts at prevention were fundamentally reactive. We could make the markers harder to destroy, but we couldn't eliminate human malice. We could patrol the trails and respond to emergencies, but we couldn't see into people's hearts and intentions. The forest itself was neutral, beautiful, and dangerous in equal measure, indifferent to the human dramas playing out beneath its canopy. My radio crackled. "Perrin, you there?" It was the new volunteer coordinator, a woman named Sarah, who'd started just last month. "I'm here. What's up?" Sarah's voice was cheerful. "Got a group at the visitor center asking about the Cathedral Grove Trail. They mentioned they heard there was some incident a few months back and wanted to know if it's safe. How should I respond?" It was a question I'd been asked a dozen times since news of the incident had leaked. Local media had covered the story, focusing mostly on Andrew's arrest and the dramatic rescue. Some outlets had sensationalized it. "Deadly Love Triangle in National Park" was one particularly inaccurate headline, but the core truth remained. People came to the forest looking for beauty, peace, or adventure, and sometimes they brought their problems with them. "Tell them the trail is completely safe," I said. "All markers have been replaced and reinforced. We've increased ranger patrols in that section. The incident 3 months ago was due to criminal activity that's been resolved, and the person responsible is in custody awaiting trial." It was the official line, approved by park management, designed to reassure visitors without providing too much detail. Sarah acknowledged and signed off. I continued my patrol, following the Cathedral Grove Trail to its terminus at the scenic overlook. The view was spectacular, as always. Miles of unbroken forest stretching to the horizon, the Pacific Ocean visible as a thin blue line in the distance. I stood there for a while, thinking about all the people who'd stood in this exact spot, looking at this exact view. How many of them had been running from something? How many had been looking for answers they couldn't find in their regular lives? The forest couldn't give them those answers. It could provide perspective, perhaps, or peace, or a temporary escape from the complications of human existence. But it couldn't solve their problems. Only they could do that, and sometimes they needed help. From therapists, from friends, from the legal system. The forest was just a stage where human dramas played out, magnificent and indifferent. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Ivy. "Thought you'd want to know. Rachel summited Mount Shasta yesterday. Her first major climb since everything happened. She's doing really well." I smiled and sent back a thumbs-up emoji. Rachel's recovery was a reminder that people could heal, could reclaim the parts of their lives that fear had taken away. It didn't happen quickly or easily, but it was possible. I thought about Claire, too, wondering how she was doing. I'd heard she'd started dating again, taking it slow, building healthier relationships. The restraining order against Marcus was permanent, and she'd apparently cut all contact with him. Sometimes, the best thing you could do for yourself was walk away from someone who kept hurting you, no matter how much history you shared. As for Marcus, I didn't waste much energy thinking about him. People like that rarely changed unless they were forced to confront the consequences of their actions. Maybe he'd learned something from losing his job and his reputation. Maybe he'd just find new people to manipulate. Either way, he was no longer my problem. The sun was starting to set, painting the forest in shades of gold and orange. I began the hike back to the trailhead, my boots familiar with every root and rock on this path. After 8 years of ranging these woods, I knew them as well as anyone could. The safe trails and the dangerous ones, the places where people got lost, and the places where they found themselves. I knew the patterns of weather and wildlife, the seasonal changes in vegetation, the sounds that meant everything was normal, and the sounds that meant something was wrong. But I also knew that no amount of experience could prepare you for every situation. The forest was full of surprises, and human behavior was even more unpredictable. All you could do was stay alert, trust your training, and hope that when something went wrong, you'd be able to respond quickly enough to make a difference. As I emerged from the trees into the parking area, I saw a familiar figure leaning against my truck. Morrison. He straightened up when he saw me, and I could tell from his expression that this wasn't a social visit. "Got a minute?" he asked. I checked my watch. My shift had officially ended 10 minutes ago, but rangers didn't really operate on strict schedules. "Sure. What's going on?" Morrison pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. Trail markers, freshly destroyed, in a section of forest about 15 miles from here. Happened sometime in the last 48 hours. Different trail, different method. These were burned rather than chopped, but same result. Hikers getting confused, taking wrong paths. My stomach sank. You think it's a copycat? Someone who heard about Andrew and decided to try something similar? Maybe, Morrison said. Or maybe it's just regular vandalism, and we're seeing patterns where there aren't any. But I wanted to give you a heads up. We're increasing patrols in that area, and I've asked for additional trail cameras. If this is someone deliberately targeting hikers, we need to shut it down fast. I nodded, already mentally reviewing the map of the park, thinking about patrol schedules and coverage gaps. I'll talk to the other rangers, make sure everyone's keeping eyes open for anything unusual. Morrison clapped me on the shoulder. Good. And Perrin, don't let this eat at you. We did everything right with the Kellerman situation. He's in custody, Rachel's safe, and we've improved our security measures. Can't ask for more than that. He was right, logically. But emotionally, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was testing us, presenting new challenges as soon as we'd solved the old ones. Maybe that was just the nature of the work, an endless cycle of problems and solutions, with brief moments of peace in between. After Morrison left, I sat in my truck for a while, not quite ready to drive home. The parking lot was empty now, the last visitors having departed before sunset. In the distance, I could see the dark wall of trees, impenetrable and ancient, holding secrets I'd never fully understand. People came to the forest seeking different things: adventure, peace, escape, answers. Some found what they were looking for. Others found something else entirely. I thought about the broken signs, how something as simple as a destroyed trail marker could cascade into life-threatening situations. It was a reminder that in the wilderness, small decisions had large consequences. Take the wrong path, ignore a warning sign, underestimate the weather or the terrain. Any of those could be fatal. But the same was true in life generally. The choices you made, the people you trusted, the warning signs you ignored, they all mattered, sometimes in ways you couldn't predict until it was too late. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from the volunteer coordinator. Family at Visitor Center is asking about good trails for beginners. Any suggestions? I smiled and typed back a response, recommending a short, well-marked loop trail that was perfect for first-time visitors. Then I started my truck and headed home, leaving the forest to its darkness and silence. Tomorrow I'd be back, walking the same trails, checking the same markers, looking for the same warning signs that something was wrong. It was what I did, what I'd trained for, what I'd chosen. The forest would still be here, ancient and indifferent, providing a stage for human drama while remaining fundamentally unchanged by it. And I'd be here too, watching, patrolling, trying to keep people safe in a place that was both beautiful and dangerous. The broken signs had been replaced, reinforced, improved. But signs could always be broken again, by weather or wildlife or human malice. The real question was whether people would pay attention to them, would recognize the warnings before it was too late. Some would, some wouldn't. And when they didn't, rangers like me would be there, flashlight in hand, radio on belt, searching the darkness for those who'd lost their way. As I drove down the mountain road, the forest receding behind me, I found myself thinking about Ivy's text about Rachel summiting Mount Shasta. That was the story I wanted to remember from all of this. Not the manipulation, not the danger, not the darkness, but the fact that Rachel had faced her fear and conquered it, had taken back her life and her love of the outdoors. That was what the forest should be about. Not where people got lost, but where they found themselves. Not where they faced their worst fears, but where they overcame them. The broken signs had taught us something important. That markers could be destroyed but rebuilt stronger. That people could get lost but be found. That malice existed in the world, but so did resilience and kindness, and the determination to keep going even when the path ahead was unclear. The forest would keep testing us, nature and human nature combining in unpredictable ways. But we'd keep responding, keep adapting, keep trying to make the trails safer for everyone who walked them. And sometimes that was enough. The call came in at 11:37 p.m., just as I was finishing my incident report from earlier in the day. A camper at the Upper Pines campground had reported seeing lights on El Capitan, not the usual headlamps of climbers descending after a late summit, but something else, flickering, irregular, too high up to be easily explained. I'm Dominic Hayes, and I've been a ranger at Yosemite National Park for 9 years. In that time, I've learned that unusual light reports fall into 3 categories: misidentified aircraft, teenagers with high-powered lasers, or something that actually requires investigation. I grabbed my gear and headed out, driving through the empty valley roads toward El Capitan View. The massive granite monolith loomed against the night sky, a darker shadow against darkness, its 3,000 vertical feet of rock face invisible except where starlight caught the sharper edges. I parked and got out, immediately scanning the rock face with my binoculars. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then, about 1,800 feet up, I caught it. A brief flash of light, gone almost as soon as I registered it. I radioed dispatch. Hayes here. I've got visual confirmation of lights on El Cap, approximately 1,800 feet up, east-facing wall. Not consistent with normal climbing activity, requesting permission to investigate at first light. The dispatcher's response was immediate. Copy that, Hayes. Be advised we have no registered climbing permits for that section of the wall tonight. Proceed with caution and report findings. No permits. That meant either someone was climbing illegally or something else was happening up there. I spent the next hour monitoring the rock face from various vantage points around the valley. The lights appeared sporadically, sometimes a steady glow for 10 or 15 seconds, sometimes just a quick flash. Too irregular to be climbers signaling for help, but too deliberate to be reflected moonlight or some natural phenomenon. Around 1 in the morning, the lights stopped completely. I stayed until 3, watching and waiting, but saw nothing more. Whatever had been up there was either gone or had stopped using lights. At first light, I was back at El Capitan's base, this time with full climbing gear. I'm not a technical climber. My ranger training included basic rope work and rescue techniques, but I'm not qualified for the kind of big wall climbing that El Cap demands. Still, I could access the lower sections and the various approach trails that wind around the base. I started with the most obvious routes, looking for any signs of recent activity. About 200 feet up an approach ledge called the Free Blast Ramp, I found the first piece of evidence. A climbing rope, still attached to an anchor point, hanging down the rock face. The rope was high quality, relatively new, but it had been cut, not frayed or broken from wear, deliberately severed about 20 feet down from the anchor. I examined the cut end carefully. Clean edges, consistent with a sharp knife. Someone had cut this rope intentionally, either to shed weight or for some other reason I couldn't immediately determine. I followed the rope's path with my eyes, tracing where it might have led. The anchor point was solid, professionally placed, suggesting experienced climbers. But the cut rope and the absence of any climbers in the immediate area was troubling. I radioed my findings to dispatch and requested a technical climbing team to investigate further up the wall. While I waited for their response, I continued searching the area. 50 feet higher, tucked into a small alcove barely visible from below, I found a backpack. It was a typical climbing pack, 40 liters, covered in chalk dust and dirt, with carabiners still attached to the outside loops. I photographed it in place before carefully examining the contents. Inside were water bottles, energy bars, a first aid kit, and, most concerning, a wallet with ID. The name on the driver's license was Jason Kramer, 29 years old, from Boulder, Colorado. An address, a face, a person who should be connected to this gear but wasn't anywhere in sight. The pack showed no signs of damage or struggle. It had been placed in the alcove carefully, almost hidden, not dropped or discarded in panic. I checked the registration logs on my phone. No Jason Kramer listed on any current climbing permits for El Capitan. Either he was climbing illegally or something had changed since he'd registered. I bagged the wallet as evidence and continued my search, moving methodically across the accessible areas of the lower wall. That's when I heard voices below me. I looked down to see a group of about 8 people gathered at the base of the rock face, and one person was gesturing animatedly while the others listened. I recognized the speaker immediately, Lila Morrison, one of the most experienced tour guides in the valley. I'd worked with her before on several incidents, and she had a reputation for being thorough and safety conscious. But something about her body language now suggested stress, maybe fear. I rappelled back down to the base and approached the group. "Lila, everything okay?" She turned to me, and I saw the relief wash over her face. "Dominic, thank God. We have a situation. One of my tour groups, they went climbing yesterday afternoon. 4 people. They were supposed to be back by nightfall, but they never returned. I've been trying to reach them since last night, but their phones are going straight to voicemail." My stomach tightened. 4 people. Missing since yesterday afternoon. That aligned with the time frame for the mysterious lights. "Did they have a permit?" Lila nodded quickly. "Yes, fully permitted. They filed a route plan. They were taking the East Buttress route, planning to summit and descend the East Ledges. Experienced climbers, all of them. But something must have gone wrong." I pulled out my radio. "Hayes to dispatch. We've got a potential missing climber situation, 4 individuals last seen yesterday afternoon on El Cap East Buttress route. I'm at the base with their tour guide now. Request immediate SAR activation." As dispatch acknowledged and began mobilizing the search and rescue team, I turned back to Lila. "Tell me everything. When exactly did they start? What was their planned route? Any issues beforehand?" Lila pulled out a notebook, her hands shaking slightly. "They started at 2 p.m. yesterday, Jason Kramer was the lead. He's climbed El Cap 3 times before. The others were his friends, Amanda Pierce, Derek Sullivan, and Nicole Vance. All strong climbers, good gear, good conditions. They planned to summit by sunset, descend the east side, and be back at camp by 10 p.m. latest. She paused, looking up at the massive wall. When they didn't show up by 11, I called the ranger station, but I was told to wait until morning before filing a report. Standard protocol for adult climbers who might just be running late. I understood the protocol, but I also knew the statistics. Every hour that passed reduced the chances of finding missing climbers alive, especially if they'd had an accident. And the lights? Did anyone from your group mention anything about signaling if they got into trouble? Lila frowned. Jason had a headlamp and a small flashlight. They all did. But the pattern you're describing, flickering, irregular, that doesn't sound like a distress signal. That sounds like someone trying not to be seen. Her observation sent a chill through me. Why would experienced climbers try to hide their presence on a climb they were permitted for, unless something had happened that made them want to avoid detection? I showed Lila the photos of the cut rope and the backpack I'd found. Her face went pale. That's Jason's pack. I recognized the patches on it. And that rope. She stopped, her hand going to her mouth. Dominic, why would someone cut their rope? There were a few reasons, none of them good. To shed weight during an emergency descent, to leave behind damaged rope that might fail, or to prevent someone from following. I don't know yet, I said honestly, but we're going to find out. I need you to give a full statement to the SAR coordinator when they arrive. Description of each climber, what they were wearing, what gear they had, any medical conditions, emergency contacts, everything. The SAR team arrived within 40 minutes, a credit to their efficiency. The coordinator was a veteran named Tom Reeves, who I'd worked with on dozens of rescues over the years. Tom took one look at the cut rope and the abandoned backpack, and his expression hardened. This doesn't look good, Hayes. Cut rope, abandoned gear, no response to calls. We're treating this as a high-priority rescue with possible injuries or worse. We established a command post at El Capitan Meadow and began coordinating the search. Tom divided the wall into sectors, assigning teams of technical climbers to each one. Another team would search the descent routes and the areas around the base. A third team would use high-powered binoculars and spotting scopes to scan the entire wall from various vantage points, looking for any signs of the missing climbers. And I would continue investigating the lower sections where I'd found the initial evidence. As the teams deployed, I pulled Tom aside. There's something off about this. The lights last night, the deliberately cut rope, the hidden backpack. This doesn't feel like a standard climbing accident. Tom nodded grimly. I had the same thought. But right now, our priority is finding those 4 people alive. If there's something criminal happening here, we'll deal with that after everyone's safe. He was right, of course. Search and rescue first, investigation second. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened on El Capitan last night, it wasn't a simple accident. Someone had cut that rope for a reason. Someone had hidden that backpack. And 4 experienced climbers were missing in a way that didn't fit the usual patterns. I spent the next 3 hours combing the base of El Capitan, working methodically through areas that most people would overlook. Behind massive boulders that had fallen from the wall centuries ago, in narrow cracks and chimneys that served as descent routes, along the brushy slopes where someone descending in the dark might have gotten disoriented. I was looking for anything, another piece of gear, a footprint, a scrap of clothing, blood, anything that might tell me what had happened. Around noon, one of the spotting scope teams radioed in. We've got something. Sector 4, approximately 1,900 feet up. Looks like it might be a person, but they're not moving. My heart rate spiked. Can you confirm? There was a pause, then the spotter's voice came back uncertain. Negative on confirmation. Could be a pack or gear, could be a person. We need eyes on site for positive ID. Tom immediately dispatched a technical climbing team to that sector. It would take them at least 2 hours to reach 1,900 feet, probably longer if they had to navigate difficult terrain. In the meantime, all we could do was wait and continue searching other areas. I hated waiting. Every ranger did. But big wall rescues were methodical by necessity. Rushing led to mistakes, and mistakes at 3,000 feet could be fatal. I was documenting the cut rope with additional photographs when Lila approached me again. She'd been giving her statement to one of the deputies, but now she looked even more troubled than before. Dominic, there's something else. Something I didn't mention earlier because I wasn't sure if it was relevant, but now... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Yesterday afternoon, before Jason's group started their climb, I saw them arguing, not seriously, just a disagreement about the route. Jason wanted to stick to the planned East Buttress route, but Derek was pushing for a variation, something more challenging, off the standard track. Did they resolve it? I asked. Lila shook her head. I don't know. They walked away from the base area still talking, and that's the last I saw of them. But if Derek convinced Jason to change the route, they might not be where we think they are. They might be somewhere else entirely, somewhere we're not searching. That complicated everything. Search and rescue operations depended on having accurate information about where the missing party had intended to go. If Jason's group had deviated from their planned route, we might be searching the wrong area entirely. I radioed this information to Tom, who cursed quietly before acknowledging. We'll expand the search parameters, but Hayes, this is turning into a needle in a haystack situation. 3,000 feet of vertical rock face, multiple possible routes, and now we're not even sure which direction they went. He didn't need to say what we were both thinking. With each passing hour, the chances of finding all 4 climbers alive were decreasing. The temperature had dropped near freezing last night. If any of them were injured and exposed, hypothermia would have set in hours ago. And if someone had deliberately cut their rope, there might be injuries we couldn't even imagine. The technical team reached the 1,900-foot mark and confirmed what the spotters had seen. It was gear, a haul bag, the kind climbers use to carry supplies up big walls. But it wasn't attached to anything. It was just sitting on a ledge, as if someone had placed it there carefully and then left. The team leader radioed down a description of the contents. More rope, carabiners, a tent, food, water, everything you'd need for a multi-day climb, but no sign of the people who should have been using it. They're stripping gear, I said to Tom. First the rope, then the backpack, now the haul bag. They're systematically leaving behind anything that isn't absolutely essential. Tom's expression was grim. Either they're trying to move fast because of an emergency, or they're trying to move light because they're running from something. He paused. Or someone. The possibility hung in the air between us. 4 climbers, experienced and well-equipped, systematically abandoning their gear while trying to avoid detection. The lights last night, someone signaling, but not in a way that would attract official attention. The cut rope, a deliberate act that suggested urgency or fear. This was starting to look less like a climbing accident and more like people hiding from something. Or someone. We need to consider the possibility that this is a crime scene, I said quietly. Tom nodded. I've already contacted the special agent in charge for the region. If we find evidence of foul play, this becomes a federal investigation. But Hayes, he met my eyes seriously. Until we know what we're dealing with, we proceed as a search and rescue. Those 4 people might still be alive, and if they are, they need our help. Questions about what happened come second to getting them off that wall safely. As the afternoon wore on, more pieces of equipment were found scattered across the rock face. A second pack at 2,200 feet, a coil of rope wedged into a crack at 2,400 feet. Each discovery was documented, photographed, and reported, but none of them brought us closer to finding the actual climbers. It was like they'd vanished, leaving only a trail of breadcrumbs that led nowhere. Around 4 p.m., as the sun began its descent and long shadows started creeping across the valley, one of the search teams found something that changed everything. On a small ledge at 2,700 feet, barely wide enough for one person to stand on, there was blood. Not a lot, just a smear on the granite, dried and dark. But definitely blood. The team collected a sample and photographed the location, and suddenly the urgency of the search ratcheted up several notches. Someone was injured. The question was how badly, and where were they now? The blood was at least 12 hours old, based on how it had dried. If someone had been bleeding that much yesterday afternoon and hadn't received medical attention, they could easily be dead by now. Or worse, dying slowly from blood loss or infection while we searched in the wrong places. Tom made the call to extend the search through the night, bringing in additional resources and equipment. Powerful floodlights were set up at the base of El Capitan, illuminating sections of the wall in harsh white light. More technical climbers were brought in from neighboring districts. Even a helicopter was dispatched, though its usefulness was limited by the difficult winds and the risk of rotor wash dislodging rocks that could fall on climbers or rescuers below. As darkness fell and the lights came on, El Capitan was transformed into something alien and surreal. The normally majestic granite wall became a stark landscape of light and shadow, every crack and feature thrown into sharp relief. I stood at the base looking up at 3,000 feet of rock that suddenly seemed less like a natural wonder and more like a vertical maze where 4 people had vanished into thin air. Lila was still there, wrapped in a jacket someone had given her, refusing to leave until her clients were found. I approached her carefully. "You should go back to your hotel. Get some rest. There's nothing more you can do here." She shook her head firmly. "I'm responsible for them. I vetted them, I approved their climb, I let them go up there. If something's happened..." Her voice broke. "I need to be here." I understood the guilt. Every ranger who'd lost someone on their watch felt it. That sickening certainty that you should have seen it coming, should have done something different. But guilt didn't help anyone, and exhausted guides making decisions from a place of emotion could create new problems. "Lila, I need you thinking clearly, and I need you rested in case we find them and need someone who knows them to help with communication or identification. Please." She finally agreed, and I arranged for a ranger vehicle to take her back to Yosemite Village. After she left, I turned back to the wall, watching the search team's lights moving across the granite like fireflies. Somewhere up there, 4 people were either hiding, injured, dead, or some combination of all 3, and we were running out of time to find them. The night search continued until just after 3 a.m., when Tom made the difficult call to suspend operations until first light. It wasn't safe to have teams rappelling and climbing in the dark, even with artificial lighting. Too many variables, too many ways for rescuers to become victims themselves. I stayed at the command post reviewing photographs and documentation from the day's search, trying to find patterns in the scattered equipment and the route the missing climbers might have taken. Around 4:30, as I was examining photos of the blood smear for the 100th time, my radio crackled with an unexpected transmission. "This is climber to ranger station. Anyone receiving?" The voice was male, strained, speaking in a forced whisper. I grabbed the radio immediately. "This is Ranger Hayes. Identify yourself and your location." There was a pause, then the voice came back. "This is Derek Sullivan. I'm one of the missing climbers. We need help, but you have to listen carefully. Don't send teams up the standard routes. He's watching them." My pulse jumped. "Derek, what's your condition? How many of you are there? What's your location?" But the transmission had already cut out, dissolved into static. I tried repeatedly to re-establish contact, but got nothing. I immediately woke Tom and played him the recording. His face went hard as he listened. He said he's watching them. Who's watching? And why would he warn us away from standard routes? We reviewed the transmission with the technical team, trying to pinpoint where it might have originated based on signal strength and direction. But El Capitan's granite walls played havoc with radio signals. The transmission could have come from anywhere on the upper half of the wall. What was clear was that Derek Sullivan was alive, conscious enough to operate a radio, and afraid of something specific enough to warn us away from certain approaches. "This changes our entire operational framework," Tom said, rubbing his face tiredly. "If there's a hostile presence on that wall, another climber, someone stalking them, we can't just send teams up blind. We need to know what we're walking into." He turned to me. "Hayes, you have law enforcement training. What's your assessment?" I'd been thinking about it since the moment I heard Derek's voice. 4 experienced climbers, systematically abandoning gear, trying to move fast and light. Someone injured but still mobile enough to leave blood on a ledge at 2,700 feet. And now a warning that someone is watching the standard routes. I paused, piecing it together. I think they encountered another climber up there. Someone who either attacked them or threatened them. They're trying to descend without being followed, which is why they cut the rope, to prevent pursuit. But whoever it is has them pinned down, watching the obvious escape routes. Tom's expression was grim. If that's true, we're not just looking at a rescue situation. We're looking at a potential hostage scenario or assault in progress, 3,000 feet up a granite wall. He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling in the FBI. This is beyond park ranger jurisdiction now." While Tom made calls, I assembled what we knew. 4 climbers had gone up El Capitan yesterday afternoon on a permitted route. Sometime during their climb, something had happened that caused them to abandon their planned ascent and start descending rapidly, leaving equipment behind. One of them, likely Jason Kramer based on the blood type preliminarily identified, had been injured. They'd been on the wall all night, and at least one of them was now hiding and afraid to use standard descent routes because of someone watching. The FBI arrived just after dawn. 2 special agents from the Sacramento field office, a man named Marcus Powell, and a woman named Jennifer Keating. They listened to the radio transmission, reviewed the evidence we'd collected, and immediately took command of the situation. "This is now a federal criminal investigation," Powell said. "Assault, possibly attempted murder, definitely reckless endangerment. But our immediate priority is getting those 4 people off that wall safely." Keating was already studying topographic maps of El Capitan. "If the suspect is watching standard routes, we need to approach from an unexpected direction. What are the technical climbing requirements for the north face?" Tom shook his head. "North face is exponentially more difficult than the east routes. It would take a specialized team hours to reach the upper elevations, and we'd be going in essentially blind." I had a different idea. What if we don't approach from below? What if we approach from above? Everyone turned to look at me. El Capitan's summit is accessible via hiking trails from the backside. It's a long hike, 8 miles and significant elevation gain, but it's non-technical. We could get a team to the summit, then rappel down to search the upper sections of the wall. If Derek and the others are hiding somewhere in the upper third, we might be able to reach them without whoever's watching from below seeing us coming. Powell considered this. How long to get a team to the summit? Tom checked his watch. If we start now, we could have people on top by noon, early afternoon at latest, but rappelling down El Capitan is serious technical work. We'd need our best climbers, and even then it's risky. Powell made the decision quickly. Do it. Assemble your best technical team for the summit approach. Meanwhile, we'll maintain a visible presence at the base. Make it look like we're still searching the standard routes. If someone is watching, we want them focused on us, not on the team coming from above. The plan was set in motion with remarkable speed. 6 of our most experienced climbing rangers, including myself, geared up for the summit hike. We carried full technical climbing equipment, medical supplies, and enough provisions for an extended operation. If we found the missing climbers and they were injured, we needed to be prepared for everything from simple first aid to complex rope rescue operations. The hike to El Capitan's summit was grueling. 8 miles of switchbacks, loose scree, and steep elevation gain, all while carrying 60-pound packs of gear. We moved as quickly as safety allowed, knowing that every minute we delayed was another minute the missing climbers were in danger. Around 11 a.m., we reached the summit, a relatively flat area of granite with stunning views of the valley below and the high country stretching to the east. From the summit, El Capitan's upper reaches were accessible but intimidating. We'd be rappelling down routes that weren't regularly climbed, over features that might not have secure anchor points, searching for 4 people who could be anywhere in thousands of square feet of vertical granite. Tom, who'd come up with our team, organized us into 3 pairs. Each pair would take a different section of the upper wall, rappelling down systematically and searching as we went. I was partnered with a ranger named Sarah Vickers, a strong climber with nerves of steel. We were assigned the northeast section, an area that included several large ledge systems where climbers might take shelter. As we rigged our first rappel and prepared to go over the edge, Sarah looked at me seriously. If we find them and there's a hostile presence, what's the protocol? It was a good question, one I'd been thinking about throughout the hike. We assess and report first, I said. If we can extract them safely, we do. If there's an immediate threat, we defend ourselves and them as necessary, but we don't take unnecessary risks. We're not trained tactical operators. Sarah nodded, checking her gear one final time. Then we stepped backward off the summit and began our descent into the vertical world of El Capitan's upper reaches. Rappelling down El Capitan is a strange experience. You're moving through space that few people ever occupy, dangling on a rope thousands of feet above the valley floor, with nothing but air and granite around you. Every sound is amplified. The scrape of your boots on rock, the metallic click of carabiners, your own breathing. And all the while, you're hyper-aware that somewhere in this vertical maze, 4 people are hiding, and someone dangerous might be hunting them. We'd descended about 200 feet when I heard it. Voices, faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere below and to our left. I signaled Sarah, and we carefully swung ourselves toward the sound, using small ledges and features to redirect our ropes. The voices grew clearer as we descended another 50 feet. Then I saw them. 3 people, huddled on a ledge barely 10 feet wide, partially hidden by an overhang. 2 women and 1 man, all looking exhausted, frightened, and relieved when they saw us. I recognized them from the photos Lila had provided: Amanda Pierce, Nicole Vance, and Derek Sullivan. But there was no sign of Jason Kramer. As Sarah and I rigged anchor points and worked our way onto the ledge with them, Derek grabbed my arm urgently. "Where's Jason?" I asked immediately. Derek's face crumpled. "He's below us, maybe 300 feet down. He's hurt bad. Fell about 20 feet yesterday when Marcus cut his rope. We've been trying to figure out how to get to him, but Marcus is watching the routes. Every time we try to move, he appears somewhere nearby. He's been stalking us all night." Marcus. A name, finally. "Who is Marcus? Another climber?" Amanda spoke up, her voice hoarse. "Marcus Brennan. He was climbing alone when we ran into him around 1,500 feet. Seemed friendly at first. Asked if he could join our group for the rest of the ascent. We said yes. That was our mistake." Nicole continued the story, her hands shaking. "Things were fine for the first hour. Then Marcus started acting strange, making inappropriate comments, getting too close to Amanda and me. Derek called him out, told him to back off. Marcus got angry, said we'd invited him along and now we were being rude. The argument escalated." She paused, closing her eyes. "Then Marcus pulled a knife. My blood went cold." "He attacked you?" Derek nodded. "He went after Jason first, I think because Jason was the biggest threat, the strongest climber. Slashed at him, cut his rope while Jason was on lead. Jason fell, managed to catch himself on a small ledge, but he's hurt. Might be internal injuries. Since then, Marcus has been playing cat and mouse with us, letting us see him occasionally, cutting off escape routes, forcing us higher and higher on the wall." Sarah was already on the radio, relaying our location and situation to the command post. I focused on the immediate problem. "Why would he do this? What does he want?" Amanda's voice was bitter. "Power. Control. He said things about how we'd disrespected him, how he'd teach us what happens to people who reject him. I think he's mentally unstable, living out some kind of fantasy up here where he has complete control." It was a nightmare scenario. A potentially psychotic individual armed with a knife on a 3,000-foot wall with 4 victims who had nowhere to run. The vertical terrain that made El Capitan so spectacular for climbers also made it a perfect prison. You couldn't flee in any direction without technical climbing skills, and Marcus apparently had those in abundance. "We need to get to Jason," I said. "Can you show me exactly where he is?" Derek pointed down and slightly east. "There's a big ledge system about 300 feet down. He's on the upper section, can't climb down without a rope, and we couldn't get a rope to him without Marcus seeing us." I studied the terrain, tracing possible routes in my mind. 300 feet of difficult climbing, with a dangerous individual potentially watching from multiple vantage points. Sarah finished her radio communication and reported back. "FBI is coordinating with tactical team. They want us to secure these 3 and wait for backup before attempting to reach Jason." I understood the caution, but every minute Jason spent injured and alone increased the risk of serious complications. "How long until backup arrives?" Sarah checked her watch. "Minimum 2 hours. They have to hike up, get into position." 2 hours. I looked at Derek, Amanda, and Nicole. They were exhausted, dehydrated, traumatized, but they were stable. Jason was injured and alone. The decision crystallized in my mind. "Sarah, you stay here with them. Keep them safe, wait for backup. I'm going down to Jason." Sarah started to protest, but I cut her off. "We don't have time to argue. Every minute increases the risk of him dying from internal bleeding or shock. I can rappel down, assess his condition, and hopefully get him stabilized until the tactical team arrives." I rigged a new rappel line, double-checked every knot and anchor point, and prepared to descend. Before I went over the edge, Derek grabbed my arm again. "Ranger, Dominic, be careful. Marcus is smart. He'll have seen you coming down from the summit. He might be waiting." I nodded, unclipping my radio from my belt and handing it to Sarah. "If something happens, if you hear anything that sounds wrong, radio for help immediately. Don't try to rescue me. Wait for the tactical team." Then I stepped backward off the ledge and began rappelling down toward Jason Kramer, alone with the knowledge that somewhere in the vertical maze of El Capitan, a dangerous man with a knife was watching. The descent to Jason's position took longer than I'd anticipated. The terrain was complex, overhangs that forced me to swing pendulum style to reach new anchor points, sections of loose rock that shifted under my weight, and the constant awareness that I was essentially alone in a vertical environment with a hostile presence somewhere nearby. Every shadow, every sound, every movement of air made me tense and ready to defend myself. About 200 feet into the descent, I saw him, or rather, I saw movement, a figure on a parallel route maybe 50 yards to my east, watching me. The person was too far away for detailed identification, but I could see they were alone, dressed in dark climbing clothes and definitely tracking my progress. Marcus Brennan. I froze on the rope, trying to decide my next move. If I continued down, I'd be exposed and vulnerable. If I stayed put, Jason was still in danger and time was passing. The figure moved then, climbing with practiced efficiency toward a position that would intersect my route to Jason. He was cutting me off, preventing me from reaching Jason directly. I had to make a choice, retreat to safety or find an alternate route. I studied the rock face around me, looking for options. To my right was a deep chimney system, a vertical crack in the granite that looked difficult but passable. If I could traverse into that chimney, I might be able to descend out of Marcus's line of sight and approach Jason from a different angle. I made the decision and committed to it, swinging my body toward the chimney and using a combination of rope techniques and pure physical strength to maneuver across the blank granite. It was exhausting work, and several times I felt my muscles burning with the effort. But after 15 minutes of careful movement, I'd reached the chimney system and wedged myself into it, hidden from view by the overhanging rock walls. From inside the chimney I could descend more quickly, using traditional climbing techniques, stemming, jamming, and chimneying my way down through the crack. It was claustrophobic and physically demanding, but it was faster than rappelling and it kept me concealed. After another 100 feet, I emerged from the chimney onto a large ledge system. And there he was, Jason Kramer. He was conscious but clearly in bad shape. His face was pale, and there was a makeshift bandage around his torso, dark with dried blood. When he saw me, relief washed over his features so strongly that I thought he might pass out. I moved to him quickly, setting down my pack and beginning an immediate medical assessment. "Jason, I'm Ranger Dominic Hayes. We've got your 3 friends safe. Let me look at your injuries." The gash across his ribs was deep, a knife wound that had bled significantly. He'd done a decent job of applying pressure and bandaging it with torn fabric from his shirt, but he'd lost a lot of blood and showed signs of shock. "Can you move?" I asked. Jason nodded weakly. "I think so, but Dominic, he's out there. Marcus. He comes by every few hours just to check that I'm still here. Last time was maybe 30 minutes ago." That meant we had a window, but not a large one. I pulled out my medical kit and began properly cleaning and bandaging Jason's wound, giving him water and emergency glucose tablets to help with the shock. While I worked, he told me his version of events. I thought I was going to die. When he cut my rope and I fell, I was sure that was it. Caught myself on this ledge purely by luck. Marcus looked over the edge, saw I'd survived, and actually laughed. Said he'd be back to finish the job once he'd dealt with the others. "Why did he attack you?" I asked, securing the bandage and preparing to rig a rope system that would allow us to evacuate. Jason's face was bitter. Because Amanda told him no. He made a pass at her, she rejected him politely, and something in him just snapped. Started saying things about women always thinking they're too good, about how people like us needed to be taught respect. Then he pulled the knife and went after me because I stepped between them. It was a depressingly familiar pattern: toxic masculinity, rejection, and violence, all playing out 3,000 feet above the valley floor where there was nowhere to escape. I finished rigging the evacuation system, a complex arrangement of pulleys and ropes that would allow us to ascend back up to where Sarah and the others were waiting. Can you climb if I support your weight? Jason tested his strength, wincing. Maybe. How far? 300 feet, mostly ascending. It's going to hurt, and it's going to be slow, but I can't carry you out. You'll need to help. Jason nodded, determination replacing the pain in his expression. Let's do it. I'm not staying here for Marcus to find again. We were about to start when I heard it. The scrape of rock and metal, the sound of someone climbing toward us. Marcus had returned. I pushed Jason back against the wall, positioning myself between him and the approaching sounds. My hand went to my belt where I carried both a radio and pepper spray. Not much of a defense against a knife, but better than nothing. Then Marcus appeared, pulling himself onto the ledge with the easy confidence of an experienced climber. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 30, with an athletic build and features that would have been handsome if not for the cold, calculating expression in his eyes. Well, he said, looking between me and Jason. A ranger, that's unfortunate. I was hoping to finish my business here without official interference. His voice was calm, almost conversational, which somehow made him more unsettling. I kept my voice level and authoritative. Marcus Brennan, you're under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon and attempted murder. Put down any weapons and move away from the edge. Marcus smiled, a chilling expression that didn't reach his eyes. Arrest? We're 3,000 feet up a granite wall, Ranger. Your authority doesn't mean much here. This is my domain. These are my rules. He pulled out the knife, a fixed-blade climbing knife, designed for cutting rope in emergencies but equally effective as a weapon. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to climb back up to wherever you came from. You're going to tell everyone that you couldn't find Jason, that he must have fallen, and I'm going to finish what I started. I didn't move. That's not going to happen. There are FBI agents, tactical teams, and rangers all over this wall. You're surrounded. The only way you leave here is in custody. Marcus's smile widened. Surrounded? I've been climbing El Capitan for 15 years. I know every route, every ledge, every crack and chimney. I can disappear into this wall and they'll never find me. But you... He took a step forward. You're in my way. What happened next happened fast. Marcus lunged forward with the knife, aiming for my midsection. I sidestepped and sprayed pepper spray directly into his face. He screamed, clutching at his eyes, and I used the moment to tackle him, trying to control the knife hand. We struggled on the narrow ledge, both of us acutely aware that a fall from this height would be fatal. The knife clattered away, sliding toward the edge, and I managed to get Marcus's arm twisted behind his back in a control hold. But Marcus was strong and trained, and he used climbing techniques to break my hold, slipping out of my grasp and scrambling toward the knife. I lunged after him, grabbing his leg, and we both slid dangerously close to the edge. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought we were both going over. Then my hand found a solid crack, and I arrested our slide inches from a 3,000-foot drop. Jason, despite his injuries, had retrieved my radio and was screaming into it. Officer needs assistance. Ranger Hayes is in a fight with the suspect on the ledge. We need help now. I could hear Sarah's response, urgent and commanding, calling for immediate backup from all available units. But help was still minutes away, and Marcus was reaching for the knife again. I made a split-second decision. Rather than trying to maintain control on the narrow ledge where one wrong move could kill us both, I released Marcus and scrambled backward, putting distance between us. Marcus grabbed the knife and stood, his face still streaming tears from the pepper spray, his breathing ragged. You shouldn't have done that, Ranger. Now this gets messy. He advanced toward me, and I knew I was out of options. I couldn't retreat further without abandoning Jason. I couldn't fight effectively on this terrain without risking a fall. All I could do was buy time and hope the tactical team arrived before Marcus could finish what he'd started. Marcus, listen to me. You're not thinking clearly. Right now, you're looking at serious charges, but you're not a murderer yet. Everyone you've attacked is alive. You can walk away from this, spend some time in prison, and eventually rebuild your life. But if you kill a federal officer, that changes everything. That's death penalty territory. For just a moment, I saw doubt flicker across Marcus's face. Then it hardened again. You think I care about that? You think I have anything to go back to? This? He gestured at the wall around us. This is where I belong. Where I'm in control. Where people respect me. I'd rather die here than go back to a world where I'm nothing. It was the statement of someone who'd completely lost touch with reality, who'd built a fantasy world where violence and control were the only currencies that mattered. There was no reasoning with that mindset, no logical argument that would penetrate the delusion. All I could do was survive long enough for help to arrive. That's when I heard it. The sound of multiple people rappelling down from above, the clatter of equipment, and authoritative voices calling out commands. The tactical team had arrived. Marcus heard it too, and his expression shifted from determined to desperate. He looked at me, at Jason, at the ropes hanging down from above, calculating his odds. Then, in a move that shocked everyone, he ran toward the edge of the ledge and jumped. For a terrible moment, I thought he'd committed suicide. Then I saw that he'd grabbed a hanging rope, probably one we'd left earlier during the search, and was rappelling down at a dangerous speed, essentially free-falling with just enough friction to control his descent. He was escaping, using his climbing skills to flee deeper into the wall where the tactical team would have difficulty following. The tactical team reached our ledge seconds later, heavily armed and moving with military precision. I quickly briefed them on Marcus's escape route and direction, and they split into pursuit teams, some continuing down while others spread out laterally to cut off possible escape paths. Meanwhile, 2 team members began the process of evacuating Jason, rigging a stretcher system and preparing him for the complex lift to the summit. Over the next hour, as Jason was carefully extracted and I gave my statement to the FBI agents, Marcus Brennan remained at large on El Capitan. Reports came in sporadically. He'd been spotted at 1,900 feet, then at 1,200 feet, always moving, always one step ahead of the pursuit teams. As evening approached and light began to fade, the decision was made to suspend the active pursuit until morning. Marcus was trapped on the wall with no gear, no supplies, and nowhere to go. He'd either surrender when hunger and thirst became unbearable, or he'd make a mistake and fall. By the time we got Jason to the summit and then down to the valley floor where an ambulance was waiting, it was fully dark. He'd survived, was going to recover, and would provide crucial testimony in the case against Marcus Brennan. Amanda, Nicole, and Derek were already at the hospital, being treated for exhaustion and minor injuries, but fundamentally okay. The rescue had been successful. But as I stood at the base of El Capitan that night, looking up at the dark mass of rock where somewhere Marcus was still hiding, I felt no sense of victory, just exhaustion, and a deep sadness for how badly things could go wrong when someone's mental health deteriorated to the point of violence. Tomorrow, they'd resume the search. Eventually, they'd catch Marcus or find his body. But tonight, the shadow of El Capitan held one more secret, one more person lost in its vertical maze. The search for Marcus Brennan resumed at dawn with a coordinated effort involving park rangers, FBI tactical teams, and experienced technical climbers from across the region. I'd gotten maybe 3 hours of sleep, but I was back at the command post by 6 a.m., unable to stay away. Tom pulled me aside immediately. "Hayes, you've been up for 36 hours. You were in a knife fight on a ledge 3,000 feet up. You're officially off duty. Go home, get actual sleep, and let the fresh teams handle this. I wanted to argue, but I knew he was right. My hands were shaking slightly from exhaustion and adrenaline crash, and I'd be a liability rather than an asset in any technical operation. At least let me monitor the search from here. I want to know how this ends. Tom grudgingly agreed, and I settled into a chair with a cup of coffee that tasted like bitter salvation. The search teams deployed at first light, following the probable routes Marcus could have taken during his escape. But as the morning wore on, it became clear that finding him wasn't going to be simple. Marcus knew El Capitan intimately, knew every ledge and crack where someone could hide or rest. He could be anywhere in the 3,000 vertical feet of rock face, and searching it thoroughly would take days. Around 9 a.m., I got a call from Lila Morrison. She'd heard about the resolution of the rescue and wanted to check on her clients. I assured her that all 4 were alive and receiving medical care. There was a long silence on the line. Then Lila said quietly, "I keep thinking about how I vetted Marcus when he asked to join their climb. He seemed experienced, polite, normal. How did I miss that he was dangerous?" It was the same question every person who'd encountered Marcus before his breakdown was probably asking themselves. "You couldn't have known," I told her. "Mental illness and violent tendencies aren't always visible. Sometimes people hide them very well. Sometimes they deteriorate rapidly. This isn't your fault." But I could hear in her voice that she didn't believe that, not yet. Guilt was something she'd have to work through over time. The search continued throughout the day with no sign of Marcus. As afternoon turned to evening, speculation began about whether he might have fallen during his escape. A fall from the heights where we'd last seen him would be instantly fatal, and his body might not be recoverable for days or weeks depending on where it landed. But without confirmation, the search had to continue. That night, I returned to my ranger housing and tried to sleep, but my mind kept replaying the confrontation on the ledge. The cold calculation in Marcus's eyes, the way he'd been willing to kill over a perceived slight, the desperation in his final escape attempt. I'd encountered dangerous people before in my years as a ranger. Poachers, drug manufacturers using remote areas for labs, occasional violent criminals hiding in the wilderness. But there was something particularly chilling about Marcus's combination of physical skill and psychological instability. The next morning brought a break in the case, but not the one anyone expected. A climber on the west face of El Capitan, nowhere near where we'd been searching, reported finding abandoned climbing gear and signs of recent passage. When teams investigated, they found clear evidence that Marcus had traversed horizontally across the wall during the night, moving into a completely different section of the rock face. He'd essentially disappeared into El Capitan's vastness, and we were back to square one. The FBI made the decision to shift strategies. Rather than trying to hunt Marcus down, they would wait him out. Surveillance teams were positioned at all possible descent points, equipped with high-powered optics and communication equipment. Additional teams monitored the summit trails. The message was clear. Marcus Brennan was trapped on El Capitan. Without food, water, or gear, he couldn't survive indefinitely. Eventually, he'd have to come down, and when he did, they'd be waiting. Days passed. I returned to my normal ranger duties, though I kept one ear always tuned to updates about the Marcus Brennan situation. Jason was released from the hospital with strict orders to rest and let his injuries heal. Amanda, Nicole, and Derek gave extensive statements to the FBI and began the process of dealing with the psychological trauma of their ordeal. Lila Morrison took a leave of absence from her guide work, needing time to process what had happened to people under her care. On the 5th day after Marcus's escape, a hiker on the trail to El Capitan's summit found something disturbing, a bloody handprint on a rock, still relatively fresh. DNA testing confirmed it was Marcus's blood. He was still alive, still on the wall, but he was injured. The psychological profile suggested he might be moving toward a final confrontation or suicide attempt. Additional teams were deployed, and the FBI prepared for multiple scenarios. The resolution came on the 7th day, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with exhaustion and surrender. A park ranger on routine patrol at the base of El Capitan's southeast face heard someone calling for help. She investigated and found Marcus Brennan, barely conscious, lying on a narrow ledge about 200 feet up. He'd apparently attempted to descend during the night, lost his grip due to weakness and injury, and fallen approximately 50 feet before catching himself. Now he was trapped, too weak to climb further, and finally ready to accept help. The extraction took 3 hours. Medical personnel were lowered to his position, assessed his injuries, dehydration, exposure, multiple lacerations, a possible concussion from the fall, and prepared him for transport. FBI agents accompanied the rescue team, ready to take him into custody the moment he reached safe ground. I watched from the command post as they brought him down, a figure on a stretcher who'd gone from predator to victim in the span of a week. Marcus Brennan was taken to the hospital under armed guard, treated for his injuries, and then transferred to federal custody. The charges were extensive: 4 counts of attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, assault on a federal officer, illegal climbing, and various other offenses. His attorney would likely argue mental illness, and there might be truth to that argument. But it didn't change what he'd done, the terror he'd inflicted, the lives he'd nearly ended. In the aftermath, there were the usual investigations and reviews. The Park Service examined whether there should be additional screening for climbers applying for permits. The FBI analyzed the incident for lessons learned about managing hostile situations in technical terrain. Mental health professionals weighed in on the warning signs that Marcus might have displayed and how similar cases could be prevented in the future. I spent a lot of time thinking about the shadow of El Capitan, not just the physical shadow, that massive granite wall cast across the valley, but the metaphorical shadows where people could hide their darkest impulses. The wilderness attracted all kinds: adventurers seeking beauty, athletes pushing their limits, and occasionally people running from or toward something broken inside themselves. El Capitan had been the stage for Marcus's breakdown, but the seeds of that breakdown had been planted long before he ever set foot in Yosemite. 3 months later, I was back doing a routine equipment check on the lower sections of El Capitan when Lila Morrison approached me. She'd returned to guide work, though she told me she now did much more extensive psychological screening of her clients and was training in mental health first aid. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for saving my clients, for not giving up on them even when it was dangerous." I appreciated the sentiment, but I corrected her gently. I was doing my job. And honestly, they saved themselves too. Derek, Amanda, Nicole, they survived 24 hours on that wall with Marcus stalking them, injured and terrified, but still thinking clearly enough to hide and wait for help. Jason hung on despite his injuries. They're the real survivors of this story. Lila nodded thoughtfully. Do you ever wonder if there are others? Other people like Marcus, hiding in plain sight, one bad day away from snapping? I did wonder about that, especially on night shifts when the darkness seemed to amplify every shadow. I think there probably are, I admitted. But I also think most people, when things get bad, they reach out for help instead of turning to violence. Marcus is an outlier, the exception. We can't live in fear of exceptions. As Lila left and I returned to my work, I found myself looking up at El Capitan, that magnificent wall of granite that had witnessed so much human drama over the decades. People had died on it, been rescued from it, achieved incredible feats of athleticism on it, and occasionally, like Marcus Brennan, revealed their darkest selves on it. The rock itself remained indifferent, eternal, unchanged by the brief human stories playing out across its face. I thought about Jason Kramer's blood on that ledge at 2,700 feet, now weathered away by sun and rain. I thought about the cut rope, the abandoned packs, the night lights that had started this whole investigation. And I thought about the radio transmission from Derek Sullivan, warning us about being watched. In the end, it had all come down to people, their resilience, their fear, their capacity for both violence and survival. The Park Service updated protocols after the incident. Additional safety briefings for climbing permits, more emphasis on group dynamics and conflict resolution, better communication systems for technical terrain, small improvements that might prevent the next tragedy, or at least mitigate it. But there was no perfect system, no foolproof way to predict when someone would break. 6 months after the incident, Marcus Brennan stood trial. The jury heard testimony from Jason, Amanda, Nicole, and Derek about their ordeal on El Capitan. They heard from me about the physical confrontation on the ledge. They heard from psychological experts about Marcus's history of escalating behavioral problems, his inability to handle rejection, his deteriorating grip on reality. The verdict was guilty on all counts. Sentencing was scheduled for 3 months later. I attended the sentencing hearing, curious to hear if Marcus would speak. His attorney argued for leniency based on mental illness, for treatment rather than pure punishment. The prosecution countered with the calculated nature of his attacks, his ability to evade capture for days, despite his supposed impairment, his lack of remorse. The judge listened to both sides, then gave Marcus an opportunity to address the court. Marcus stood, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the climbing clothes I remembered from the ledge. He looked at his victims in the gallery, at the judge, at me. Then he said, "I'm not sorry for what I did. Those people disrespected me. The ranger interfered with something that wasn't his business. I'd do it again." The courtroom went silent. His own attorney looked shocked. The judge's expression hardened, and when he announced the sentence, 4 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole, there were no gasps of surprise. As I left the courthouse, I ran into Jason Kramer. He'd recovered physically, though he walked with a slight limp from complications with his injuries. "Thank you," he said simply, "for coming down to get me when you didn't have to." I shook his hand. "How are you doing, really?" Jason considered the question seriously. "I still have nightmares sometimes, about being on that ledge, bleeding, knowing Marcus was out there. But I'm climbing again. Smaller walls for now, always with people I trust completely. El Capitan, though." He looked away. "I don't know if I'll ever go back there." I understood that completely. Some places became associated with trauma so strongly that returning to them was more harmful than healing. Maybe someday Jason would feel differently. But if he never climbed El Capitan again, that was okay. He'd survived, and that was what mattered. We talked for a few more minutes, exchanging contact information and promising to stay in touch. Then I drove back to Yosemite, back to the valley, back to the shadow of El Capitan. Standing at the base of that massive wall as the sun set and darkness crept across the granite, I thought about all the stories that Rock had witnessed. Triumph and tragedy, courage and cowardice, the best and worst of human nature all played out against its indifferent face. The shadow of El Capitan fell across the valley every evening, a temporary darkness that gave way to dawn. And in that rhythm, light and shadow, danger and safety, fear and courage, was the essential nature of the wilderness and the people who ventured into it. Marcus Brennan's story was over, at least the part that involved Yosemite. He'd spend the rest of his life in prison, a cautionary tale about the dangers of untreated mental illness and unchecked violence. But Jason, Amanda, Nicole, and Derek's stories continued. They'd rebuild, heal, and hopefully find their way back to the wilderness that had nearly killed them. Because that's what survivors do. They don't let one terrible experience define them forever. As for me, I'd continue my work as a ranger, walking the trails, checking the permits, responding to emergencies, and occasionally rappelling down granite walls to rescue people who needed help. The shadow of El Capitan would remain, casting its darkness every evening and lifting every morning, an eternal cycle of light and dark. And I'd remain vigilant, watching for the next crisis, the next person who needed saving, the next shadow hiding something dangerous. The wilderness is beautiful and terrible, nurturing and destructive, peaceful and violent, all at once. It reflects back whatever we bring into it. Marcus brought violence and found a stage for his darkest impulses. Jason and his friends brought adventure and nearly paid with their lives, but ultimately found resilience. And I brought duty, training, and a commitment to helping others, finding purpose in the vertical maze of El Capitan. The shadow falls, the shadow lifts, and the work continues.